I would like to call to order the planning board meeting for March 5th, 2020. It's about 7:10, and the first item on our agenda is a continued discussion regarding adoption of the master plan. And at this point, the last component of the plan that we really have to look at is the housing section. At the last meeting, we went through the other sections, and I think we came to agreement on the other sections. We ran out of time, so we're here as housing. At the time, we also received some feedback about inclusionary zoning from Brad Blanchett. So we had wanted to bring him here to ask questions and clarification, and so we invited him. I reached out on behalf of the board and invited him, and he's come tonight to answer any questions or share some of his feedback from his letter. And just the way the room's set up, if you wouldn't mind sitting over there.
Sure.
I'm not, just so we know we can hear you and see all that.
Sure.
So, okay, so it's actually the first item within the recommendations that we had talked about looking at, so we may as well get started on it. In terms of your feedback, does anybody have any specific questions, or is it more you'd like to hear a little bit more of Brad's line of thinking, or
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
just line of thinking? Okay, so do you want to maybe just start a little bit with some of the things that have struck you as that brought concerns to your mind, or that you wanted to bring to our attention or discussion?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first off, I'm coming here as a resident of Northborough. I'm not coming here as a member of the zoning board. I made that clear
Yes.
here. And one of the reasons why I kind of stayed out of the master plan discussion is because I am a member of the zoning board. My job, I think, is to enforce the bylaws, however they're written, in the best interest of the town, and not bring my personal opinion into the matter. But I have been following the master plan throughout. Co-chair Fran Backstrom has done a great job with updating us on the monthly ZBA meetings on what's going on. I filled out the surveys and things like that. And then once it got near the end, and I know it was kind of near the end of the road, one of the things I was reviewing were the survey results compared to the goals. And what was brought to my attention, or raised a red flag for me, were the fact that throughout the survey results, housing wasn't necessarily deemed a high priority. However, when you go to the master plan, there were 11 housing goals, 7 were deemed high priority. Going through the survey results, people look at the main, what's important to a lot of people, the traffic, the schools, and things like that. In survey 1, question 2, for example, and I didn't print out the entire master plan, but inadequate housing inventory had less than 5% of a priority. Affordability, less than 22%, just under 22%, okay, that's pretty good. But then you look at traffic and vibrancy of downtown. Traffic, 42%, vibrancy of downtown, 77%. The next question, lack of mixed-use development, 12%, which was the lowest response. So what really was brought to my attention is the fact that the survey results don't match what the high priority goals are. Inclusionary housing was called out, missing middle was called out. I think that's a little too specific as well. I think master plan should be an overarching guide for where we're going for 20 years. And in looking back in the past 20 years, I think we've done a great job as a town with housing. And I commend Mr. Leaf on his leadership on the planning board at that time. Before my time on the zoning board as well. We are over the 10% threshold, which the state recommends. Based on some of the research that I was doing, we're a minority town as far as the 10% threshold. Inclusionary housing is something, when I was looking and doing research, it came up a lot in San Francisco, Oakland area, and as well as outside of Boston. It didn't really come up a whole lot in rural suburban towns like Northborough. And the fact that doing my research, the biggest increase in the last 20 years of housing inventory in Northborough have been apartments, condos, townhouses. And so I think we are doing a great job. I think we have to continue doing a great job. I just don't think the master plan, the housing, should be at least a high priority. I'm not saying it should be, what am I trying to say? Stricken from the master plan, but it shouldn't be a high priority. Some other key findings I found, and I have 2 young kids in school. Beasley School hasn't been touched. It's been on the roadmap for capital campaign improvements. The last 15 years hasn't been touched. Melican Middle School, I went there and graduated in 95. That school looks exactly the same as it does when I left there in 1995. The fire department is looking for a new station because of the increased growth in the town. I'm just looking in this building. I don't see this building lasting another 20 years in its current condition either. So I think we just need to deprioritize the housing and prioritize other things based on the survey results and just what we're seeing around town. That's what I have at a high level. I'm happy to answer any other questions. If you want me to dive deeper into a specific bullet point or a topic, I'm happy to do that as well.
Okay, any specific questions?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit, when people look at the 10%, it makes sense because we brought in Avalon. But if you were to go and ask staff to do numbers on really what is affordable in town, our numbers are more at 5% because we gave so much away with Avalon. So Avalon, of the 385 units, we only got 38 units affordable. That means like 340 are at market rate. So that's when the state came in and offered this. I mean, the ones who benefited from it was the Avalons, those corporations, as well as towns who are eagerly looking to not have, what do we call it, an unfriendly 40B, right? You're not at quota, so therefore we can do, and we're gonna go through the state and it's unfriendly and you don't get to condition it or work with it. And so it helped the towns catapult from a 5 or a 6 way up over 10, but it's a little deceiving because it's really not true numbers. So a lot of people think we are, but in factuality, we really aren't. We're at 5%. And I think that's a good exercise for staff to go through and people to know in the community that technically, if you were to look at market rate and do the, where are they in town, and it's certainly an assessor could do it, you'd probably be surprised that we're at 5%.
Okay.
I'd be very surprised.
I mean, that's, yeah.
I think a lot of, because I was on the planning board with Rick as well, when we started talking about inclusionary, we try to get it through. Inclusionary to me is just a tool. And I think we have to step back a little bit and look at what's happening now, which is land is so expensive right now. And the reasons that, and there's an issue of density, like how does a builder come in and build a house, right? And that's why developers love duplexes. The land's expensive, they get 2 for 1, their profits are where they want to be. They don't like to do the colonials. Their profits aren't as high, it's more attractive. I see this all the time in my job. Anytime, anywhere, everyone wants to tear it down and put up a duplex because it's so attractive and so profitable for builders, right? So let's just take, for example, what I see was going to happen to Northborough. You got a parcel of land in downtown Northborough that's going to be coming before you, and it's allowed use for a special permit for 4 units. And this family's going to go in there because it's going to be 3 bedrooms, right? It's 3,000 square feet at 3 bedrooms. You're taking one house down where it has 2 to 3 kids in, and you're putting 4 in that could have 12 kids in it. So when you look at like, are we impacting the schools? Absolutely. Because when you look out 20 years out, you're taking the land that's left, what people want to do with density, and they're putting just more houses on it than it was actually built for when it was done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Another example, and I was talking to Kathy about this week, it doesn't have to go in the minutes, but it's Lawrence Candle Factory, which Rick was part of, over 55, got lifted, because it was like 3 builders. There's about 24 units over there, right? Now they're all marketed as 3-bedroom units. So you've got families over there now, which were never intended. You probably could have at one time only gotten 6 units on there, 6 houses. Now you get 24 units with kids. That's like, you can go up to 48 kids going to a school system. So that's my concern. So when we see that, then we say to a developer, what tools do we have in our toolbox to ask that developer to help us? Because in Massachusetts, you can't ask for mitigation, right? So we could say, hey, write out a $500,000 check to the Beasley School, wouldn't that be great? But we don't have the right to ask for that. And they know that, and they can take us to court or whatever. So the tool is to say, hey, if you're gonna build X, or more than one, or whatever, and you find out that reasonable number, then you go back and say, you have to give something affordable, right, or something back to the town. Otherwise, A, you're never gonna let people who can't afford $500,000 into it. Or B, it's gonna affect your schools, so you gotta ask something back in return. You know, I wish the Lawrence Candle Factory asked in return, give the town $1 million, you know, while you had the 24 units, that would have been great, right? Then the town would have been, hey, you've gotten that, but now what happens is the town's getting nothing from this density housing. So every time we go and build one duplex or anything that was originally there, the town gets stripped. It affects their schools, their services, and they're not affordable. Because developers will tell you it's affordable, but it's still $500,000.
So can I ask you a question
Yeah.
about the candle
Yeah.
area? So originally it was supposed to be a situation where it would be affordable for people. Like they got density because in exchange for affordable housing for seniors or age restriction, is that what you were saying?
Well, it was always supposed to be just 2 bedrooms, which
Yeah.
then, so you're giving the density and the age restriction in return to not taxing out your schools, right?
Mhm.
So you're not gonna have a school bus going there. I mean, other towns are experiencing, Westboro's experiencing, all experiencing this thing. But when that was lifted, then they started marketing and selling them as 3 bedrooms, and now families are going in there, which was never what it was intended for. So now what happened was these 24 units, which should only have, typically not having school-age children, have it, and it's gonna impact your schools. So I'm not saying Lawrence Fall is in the past, it happened, we have to just watch out that we don't duplicate it in the future.
Yeah.
So you either have to build it and make it look like a 2-bedroom and it never changes,
Mhm.
right? And that's very hard to do, and Kathy can tell you it's really hard to do. Or you gotta give something back to the community in return, right? I'm impacting your school, so here's X. Or you give affordable, you have a tool in the toolbox, and right now, the planning board and even the ZBA, and we have nothing in our toolbox to ask when somebody asks for something very dense.
So my question was just gonna be then, if we do give that exchange, who's to say that you just, 10 years later, we're not right back here, where it was just somehow lifted along the way, or somehow it turned into a 3-bedroom on the side, or like, how do we?
Well, then that's an enforcement issue. I mean, we're not all around babysitting, that's an
Right.
enforcement issue.
But the affordable, just in general,
Yeah.
you know, what, I mean, typically, you know, our experience has been with, the comprehensive permits in town. So the affordable units are deed restricted.
Yeah.
So it's in the deed, there's an affordable, housing rider that goes with the unit. Then there's a formula as far as what the income has to be. So any of the subsidized, actually they're not subsidized, but any of the units that are in a comprehensive permit, there is, again, a formula that the state works with as far as what price the unit can be sold for or rented for. And then there is a whole, process with the state as far as the income eligibility and what you can have for assets and cars and things like that don't count. But, they look at your pensions, they look at what you have in your savings account, all that's factored into as far as for the comprehensive permits. And like each one of those units has a housing restriction on it. And any resale of those units first has to come to the town. The town has to approve whether or not the unit can be resold. It then goes to the state, and then the state determines what the sale price is. And then the town and the state then hold a housing lottery to find the next person.
If it's a 40B.
Like it's a 40.
But if it's an inclusionary, how do we know the deed isn't just changed, like, in this case,
Well, so inclusionary, and Kathy has caught this several times in the past couple of years, where there has been something that is considered to be affordable that has gone on the market at fair market rate.
yeah,
And I've got it, and I've emailed Kathy, and I said, Kathy, you gotta go after this person, this is fair market rate, it's affordable, right? So we've been catching it, I think there was 2 or 3 in the past couple of years. What was the one up on Autumn Street, that development up there by 290?
Yeah, that was a 40B.
Yeah, that's a,
With inclusionary zoning, and I didn't come, prepared tonight like with samples or anything for you, but, just 2 seconds worth. In the past, town did have an inclusionary zoning bylaw, in place. I believe it was probably the early 90s that the town adopted it. And the density bonus was not high enough for it to ever be used. So at some point, I'd have to look through, minutes from the 1990s, but at some point, the board made the determination, okay, you know what, it's not being used, we're gonna take it off the books. And so it was deleted, it had to go through town meeting action. But there are, there's many sort of, facets to an inclusionary zoning bylaw. And certainly that, deed restriction would be one of them.
So I actually had a question, Brad. I looked up some of these articles that you referenced here, and just, it pointed a little bit to it not really producing what people had hoped it to produce in affordable housing, and that seemed to be something you pointed out here.
Yep, so that's another thing that ties to part of my argument. So I was looking into inclusionary housing, and there's actually a workshop coming up at Holy Cross talking about a session on inclusionary zoning that is actually inclusive. It says nearly half of Commonwealth cities and towns have some form of inclusionary zoning. With few exceptions, these provisions have not resulted in the creation of significant number of affordable units. And Kathy, you just referenced how it was in the 90s, it just didn't work. I mean, so I don't think, I think we put the cart before the horse here in a couple ways, where we're just gonna assume that we know what we're talking about with inclusionary zoning. And half the towns in the state, half the towns and cities have failed at it. Also, bringing in high density housing, missing middle, the schools are already taxed as it is. I say we address that first, and then once we do have some capacity, then we can address that. I live in the Peaslee district. I have 2 little girls that have to get the bus about 25 to 30 minutes before my kids, to go across town to Proctor, because Peaslee doesn't have enough space in 4th grade, but Proctor does, and it's turning into a mess. Also the inclusionary zoning piece, so obviously the town's not doing it, so we're putting a workshop together. Other research I was looking at is when you ask a developer to say, use the 4 unit, for example, and you're telling him to charge $250,000 for 1 unit, well, it should go fair market rate $400,000, I'll just say. Where's that $150,000 gonna get recouped? The developer is not gonna, in his goodwill and his good heart, just take a haircut. What happens is, and what I was looking at is, the other 3 units go for a higher rate to recoup his loss, which means you are really reducing the amount of housing that is affordable. 1 unit, but the other 3 are not affordable. That's what I've seen as well. So that's just a couple pieces. Also, when we're talking about high density versus tax revenue, I was looking at the data from the town assessor's office. Single family homes still collect the largest amount of tax revenue. So I just think to make inclusionary housing a high priority, maybe it's something we do look at, but deprioritize it at this time.
Other questions or thoughts over this side?
I have a question for Michelle. You mentioned Avalon as being not a good example because it doesn't count. It wasn't clear on what she meant by that.
well, Avalon, so when Avalon was built, if they gave 10% as affordable, so that means the 385 units that are there, only units that are affordable are 10%, 38.
But actually, it's just
Yeah.
to get the numbers, at Avalon or any rental comprehensive permit, 25%
Oh, 25%.
of the units are considered affordable. So 25% of those units are at, a rental rate set by the state, and then, that people have to be income eligible in order to move into those particular units.
But the explanation is that in order to encourage rental housing, the state said that any rental project that was done as a 40B, 25% of the units had to be rented at affordable rates but all the units counted in your inventory. So when we got Avalon to go in, all 382 units count, but only 25% are rented at affordable rates, 75% are rented at over $2,000 a month. But they count. So when somebody says we're at 10% affordable,
It's because we can take the whole 3 years.
remember we talked about the big A and the little A?
Yeah,
We're doing okay big A, we're not doing so good in little A, and those are reasons why.
but it's not, so it's 25% of those units then?
Yeah,
So it's not 38, it's something different?
No,
well, it's more like 90,
Okay.
right? So that means 282, right, or whatever, is going to be affordable, meaning, you know,
So,
Not affordable.
so the state does some funny math with rentals where you can take advantage of the total number of units, which benefits the town and obviously for your affordable units. The other question I had, and maybe directed towards Kathy, so typically for inclusionary, is there like a certain number of units that it would apply? So if it's 10 or less, it doesn't, but if anything over 10 or what, or is that?
Yeah, I'm not as up to date on inclusionary as I was, say, like 15 years ago,
Yeah.
20 years ago. But from what I understand, and Shrewsbury has an inclusionary zoning bylaw. I think Westboro has one. I think Grafton might, but just as far as like area towns. So you pick. I mean, it's different for every town, but you pick. You know, it all depends on sort of the housing trend that you see happening. You know, if you're seeing a lot of 20 unit subdivisions or 10 unit subdivisions. You know, so you want to pick a number that the developer's not going to just go one under, so that he doesn't have to trigger that. But let's just use 10 as an example. So you would say, okay, if you're going to build 10 or more units, 10% have to be affordable, 25% have to be affordable, whatever it is that you want to factor in. And then what used to be really common, and what was in our zoning bylaw in the 1990s, was that the developer could either build the housing on site, or they could, and again, the state would help you with this, what this formula would be. The state would assist you with determining if the developer didn't want to build the unit on site, then that X amount of money would be donated to the town. And donated, it's not even really the right word, because it's part of the process. If you want to do, and there's a density bonus in there, obviously. If you want to do more houses, then in order to get more density, then the trade-off is that you have to provide us affordable units. So a lot of developers, again, when this first came around in Massachusetts, were saying, well, I don't want to build it in my subdivision, so I'm just going to give you whatever it is, 250,000, 500, whatever the number is. And so, as I think I said at one of our meetings in the past, towns historically are not, developers. We're not in the real estate business. So a lot of towns just have that sitting, in some sort of account, and it's really not being used because, again, towns don't develop. So a lot of the bylaws that towns are adopting now don't have that option, and so you have to build the units, and that way the town is assured that those units that are going to count towards the inventory are actually created.
So Brad, is your concern, and then this kind of makes more sense, so is your concern about the high density bonuses people are going to take advantage of because it could fit more and less, so to speak?
Not necessarily the bonuses, it's just the high density versus, or the inclusionary versus what the survey results showed us. Really is the crux of it. Where it's not considered high priority, but the takeaways were considered high priority. Also, from what I've been reading, the research I've done, is these towns that already have it in place, it's I don't want to say backfired, but it's really reduced the affordable housing supply. Like one unit and the other three are overpriced. So it's not necessarily the bonus per se, but where is this? I'm not an economist at all, but where's this money coming from? If you're asking the developer to reduce a price on a home, he's not just going to take it out of his pocket. The money has to come from somewhere. And that's whether it's from other taxpayers in town, the other people trying to buy units, that I don't know. And it shows that right now, any towns that are doing inclusionary zoning, it's just not working.
It's usually what they do is they build smaller units that are for the inclusionary, they don't give them the market rate units, right?
Mhm.
They might do a smaller, less attractive unit. But the question is that your town is at a point of where density is critical, right? Because your land is so expensive. So how do you address the density? Do you then say, no more density? Or do you then say, how do you deal with like the mixed use, whole density thing? That's the whole question that's on the thing. Because the density affects your town services, it affects your schools, right? And that's what developers want, is they want the density now. It's the next generation of housing. And to not address the density means that you leave your town open and vulnerable with no tools. So one tool that Rick and a group was advocating was, well, let's get some affordable housing out of it. Maybe another tool is, let's get some money for the schools out of it, right? But to sit there with nothing for housing, no tools, I think the town's very vulnerable at the next 20 years, because that's really the name of the game is density,
Mhm.
right?
So one thing though about the tools, and this is what frustrates me, is that even if we set something up and it's for a great purpose, there's always, somebody figures out a way to exploit it and do something that we didn't intend to happen. And so it doesn't turn into a lovely scenario where we get affordable housing. It turns into we get something jammed into a small lot that doesn't belong there, that is, way bigger than their neighbors, that doesn't look good downtown. So we create these things, these tools, hoping that like it's a best case scenario, and we've all seen the applications.
And then you have unintended
And
consequences.
they're not the best
Yeah.
case scenario, they're awful.
Right.
So how do we, it's almost like we need all sides to come in and say, listen, here, we need like a big, come to Jesus, I guess. This is what we're trying to do. We need you guys to not, to understand this is the point, that we're trying to provide these tools, but we can't have it exploited to a point where we have residents in here, upset because there's some sort of multi-complex going up in their quiet street. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how to balance that. I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something that, you see the applications, well, I'm not here as a resident, so I don't know if you don't have to comment on that, but I'm just saying that we all see the reality of what comes through the door versus what we hope comes through the door, and that's
Right.
such a struggle. I don't know.
I think it's all, and you probably want to be done with this topic, Carrie. No, I'm just picking that up. But like, it just as an example, and this isn't the solution for this, but I think, again, it's all location. We have, years ago, we had a 55 and older development built in town. It's on the Marlboro, Northborough town line. And to this day, there's not peep from anybody about it, and it's very high density. It's 3 or 4 stories, but it's not in the middle of the neighborhood, so nobody objected to it when it came, when it was being proposed. Nobody has since objected to it. There hasn't been an impact to school services and so forth. Then on the other end of town, an Avalon gets placed, on Route 9, at the corners of Route 9 and 20, no objections to that. But when you, mix it into a single family, residential neighborhood, that's where it gets very sensitive, and rightly so. And that's, so that's something, whether it's inclusionary zoning or whatever tools, this board, future boards want to address, you can, if you want to address it, you can do it as overlay districts. You can do it just in specific districts. You can, you can stay out of certain housing districts. I mean, there are ways to address, just some of the, like just off the top of my head, some of the questions that are being raised tonight. And that's just in general, it's all a matter of where, if density is what you're going to go after, it's a matter of where you place that density. And, again, in the middle, we always pick on Northgate just as an example because everyone's familiar with that neighborhood. But, a 4-story building in the middle of, Northgate is just would, so not be appropriate, as it wouldn't be in the majority of single-family neighborhoods, in Northborough.
But so inclusionary is a mandatory zoning, right? So you'd have to, like, if you hit X number of units, you trigger the inclusionary zoning bylaw.
Yes.
So in that case, it it doesn't seem like we have a whole lot of control, it's based on units, not location.
Well, you could have it only apply to certain districts, as one example, you know, I mean, inclusionary zoning
And it's
is
a special
is it-
permit thing, so it's going to
It can be,
ZBA.
some towns do it as a right, some towns do it as special permit. So you could, like as an example, if, you know, you could say you only wanted it in, I'm not gonna pick a district because people will, you know, get upset or just hear that part of it, but, right. The town planner said. You know, so you could, through any zoning, you could just apply it to a particular district or a particular area of town, or again, an overlay district, and you have to meet, you know, all these parameters before that even kicks off, you know, so you want, you know, this is an exaggeration, but it has to be a 50-acre parcel on town water, on town sewer. You know, that can be like your starter. So it's not just a matter of, you know, cobbling 2 or 3 lots together in the middle of a neighborhood. You know, so you're definitely looking for something that is a sizable piece of property that doesn't exist in the middle of a, you know, single-family neighborhood. That's just one example
Yeah.
of how you can.
But like Kathy said, like with the over 55, they don't impact the schools, and the services they use is if they use the ambulances, they pay for them, right? So it's not really a taxation on the town as much as Avalon, when it did come in originally, did impact the Proctor School. I think the numbers were affected, right? And I think along the way.
Yeah, my kids are there.
70+ kids.
Yeah, so that impacted, but I think it's leveled out a little bit there. I still think that you're gonna find these pockets of the density because maybe, you know, the land's expensive and they can't sell these $800,000 houses, you know, they're the ones that are going up on Lincoln Street, they're selling, but it's not as much demand, right? So now they're like, how do I get more housing in there? And that's when they wanna put things closer together. And the interesting thing is, because I'm coming from a complex that I'm working with now, is that even if it's an over 55, kids are coming back to their parents' house. So now they want to say, can I put my kid in the basement, right? So it's really hard to even regulate that 2-bedroom thing in. So the whole density thing overall, I think, just affects towns in general. And unless you have something in place, I think it leaves a town vulnerable unless you can get services for something back for that density for your town services or your schools.
So only a couple of comments, Karen,
Please.
I have to say. So during the committee meetings on housing, all this stuff came up. There was a lot of stuff to talk about, and it was clear that what to do about all of this needed to be sort of evaluated and discussed. So intentionally, the wording for inclusionary zoning was explore, not implement, not recommend.
Yeah.
It was basically just understand what it is, how it's working, how it's not working, and eventually, if in fact it seemed to make sense that we want to do something about it, that eventually a presentation was going to have to come before the planning board about it, and the planning board would be participating in the discussions going along, but we couldn't get it in the zoning without the planning board bringing a warrant article to town meeting. So the idea was, as part of an overall discussion of housing needs in the town, exploring inclusionary zoning seemed to be a reasonable thing to do. The major output of all of this became this goal H21, which was to launch kind of a study about housing. It talks about price points, talks about a number of things, but the reason H21 was put in the plan was to say, let's get a group of people together and talk about this stuff. We may or may not have to hire a consultant. That's why there were dollar signs next to it. But it wasn't guaranteed a consultant would have to be hired. But we put those dollar signs in there in case we felt we needed expert help to do it. But to help determine kind of a direction for where the town had to go with housing. And we also included H26, which was the housing production plan, because that's a very specific approach to affordable housing production plans. So to give you a direction towards how to put more units on your inventory. And we did one of those, and we said, as long as we're talking about this, it makes sense to bring that out and look at it and update it. So the idea was that taking a look at the housing production plan was a way to go back and review what we've done in the past about trying to put more state-approved affordable housing on the inventory. H21 was a broader approach to look at the housing needs of the town in general and come up with some ideas about what could be done. And along the way, we said it would make sense to go back and at least explore what inclusionary zoning is all about. None of that presupposed any particular decisions that would be made, except that at some point, if anything was gonna happen about housing that the zoning didn't support, the planning board was gonna have to agree to put articles on the warrant someday to make the changes. So ultimately, anything that would be different than we're doing today would have to end up being presented to the planning board for articles to go on the warrant. So that's kind of what we ended up in that whole discussion. A lot of these topics came up, and there was no way to answer them without doing the work, more work in detail to understand them. So that's kind of how those things all came down. The priorities, we set them as high priorities because we felt, we had a lot of feedback from people, about desires for housing. We had people from the senior community come to the, in-person sessions and talk about, the struggles they had in staying where they were. And so we just said, at least the evaluation work for housing ought to be done in the short term. The actual implementation of new strategies could be midterm or long term, it all depends what we come up with. So that's kind of those things all put together.
Okay, thank you, that makes sense. Does anyone?
Terry, can I say something?
Yes,
to that?
please.
I understand the senior housing issue. My parents are aging as well. I'm looking at these goals and I see little to no speak about senior housing, which I think these bylaws that you're talking about opens up the schools to get crushed again. More cars, more traffic on downtown, which also came up as an issue. I also have a bullet point here, thinking outside the box. Yes, seniors, they want to stay in their homes. They've lived in their homes forever. Marlboro recently announced a program for senior citizens property tax work-off. It's called SCRIPT. It allows anyone over the age of 60 to get a $1,000 property tax through community service. Investing in a program, I think would be a win-win for Northborough. So they can stay in their homes at a more affordable rate. Because the property taxes will never go down, they will only go up.
Henry.
Oh, sorry.
We already have that workout program, by the way, Rick.
Brad.
Rick,
Sorry,
we already,
sorry, no.
Brad, rather,
Yes.
we already have that workout program in town.
Yeah, they just told me that.
Oh,
Okay, great.
What's it called? Is it
But-
called the same thing?
Senior work off.
Oh, it's the
Senior
same
workout,
thing?
yes,
Oh,
a senior
great.
workout program in town.
Is it $1,000 too?
Yeah.
It's a model that most communities use. So we, most of all the departments, utilize volunteers through that program. Not constantly every single day, but I mean, on and off, we have volunteers in our office, work doing that.
All right, so any other questions or thoughts or anything from?
I had a question about the housing study, because we talked about it last time. And some things that came up that concerned me was, I think Kathy, you had said if we did a housing production plan, that we were bound to it. And it's a 40B housing, we have hit our 40B, but are we really bound to the housing? Like, I feel like maybe instead of the housing production plan, it should be more of, like Marlboro did, a housing market and fiscal impact analysis, like a housing plan, but I'm not sure it should be the housing production plan if we're tied to 40B and the state.
We've done both in this town. So we have a housing plan, which,
Yep.
albeit is outdated, as is our housing production plan. So the housing production plan is something that's very specific from the state. So it's what would that be, driven from the top.
Yeah.
So there's certain elements that you have to, that any community that does a housing production plan, because it has to be approved by the state. If you're gonna do a housing production plan, there's no reason to do one unless you want the state to certify your housing plan. That's the whole goal of it. So there's certain income ranges that you have to look at. There's, it's been a while since we've done one. You look at, obviously the demographics in your town, you look at, infrastructure, can your infrastructure, and that infrastructure can be anything. Can that infrastructure support additional housing? So the goal of your housing production plan is to say, we want to build X amount of units in X amount of years. And I thought it was 10, and Donnie corrected me, it's 5 years. So in your housing production plan, you go through this analysis of what your town could support affordable, housing wise, and then you set the goal, you meaning the town, you set the goal of saying, okay, we're gonna build we wanna create X amount of units in the next 5 years. And these are the methods that we're going to try to accomplish that with. And so what we did, and which is what a lot of communities do, is we knew that our big comprehensive permit, Avalon, for us, that's, I can't speak for the future, but I mean, many, towns have many Avalons. We have one, nobody has ever approached us for that kind of density. I don't know if somebody will, it all depends on how people, sell their land. But, so we knew that was coming, so we were able to say, oh, we're gonna have a housing production plan and we're gonna create so many units in the next few years, and this is how we're going to do it. So, voila, we were able to meet our housing production plan, and there's rankings that the state gives you and so forth, so we were very positive, Northborough was looked at very positively that we were able to meet our housing production plan. So to do, so there's really two components of the housing production plan. There's the look of, what's the demographics, what's your infrastructure, can you support those units, how many units can you support, and then how are you gonna build those units?
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I was listening to the master plan steering committee meeting, and you mentioned that the production plan, or somebody did, was a whole different ballgame. Can you just do like a needs assessment, or like a strategic assessment that's not required by the state, but just your own, for your own information assessment?
Yeah.
Because that's what I was confused by.
It's more comprehensive, and we've done a housing plan also in town.
Or just an assessment to see what you need.
Well, basically, that's what our housing plan was. Again, we looked at, it was done at a different time. I think we did our housing plan first, then our housing production.
No, I'm just trying to understand. There's a housing production plan that seems like you need it approved and certified. And
right, it's very specific what has to be in it.
But you could just make a more casual needs assessment for your community that's not,
the
state doesn't stamp it.
Correct, and we did that in our housing plan.
Got it.
And once again, that's what H21 is trying to get at.
Oh, so that's actually needs assessment. I just understood it as a price point study.
Well, we try to figure out the wording
That
for
would
it.
be part of it.
We just try to put some words around what we were trying to do, and so price points came up so we could sort of understand
What you were looking at.
what we're looking at and how affordable houses could be. But H21 is that general town-driven study,
Got it.
and H26 is the state, following
You know,
the state procedure.
And it makes sense within, say, 2 or 3 years, excuse me, in my opinion, to do that sort of overall general housing plan, because we'll have the 2020 census. Usually takes 2 to 3 years before we have that data, before communities have that data to use it. So that's what would be reflected, in your housing plan. You have the most current demographic information for your community. So you'd be looking at a number of factors. You'd be looking at, first of all, the breakdown in the community, or the breakout of the ranges, and age ranges, and then income ranges, and then determining it all factors in, like, how far do people commute, so for their jobs, or are they living someplace else and commuting here. So does that show you that there's a need for housing because people are commuting so far to come here? So it's
All right, so.
My question was though, for H2-6, do we
Oh,
call
no, just
it?
for Brad, I wanna make sure.
Oh,
So I
sure.
just wanna, do you have any questions for Brad, just so I can.
Well, let's see. I don't have any questions for him,
Okay.
but I do agree that I went through the surveys too, and it wasn't the highest priority, so I thought the implementation of some of those recommendations should be not as high. Because I know even there was a note from the consultants that said high density was a concern that should be further explored. So before we jump in with all these plans, I think there definitely has to be a high density exploration to see what people in town want to do. Because every time there is something high density, that's when you get all the outpouring of people, and the schools are.
Well, you seem to conclude with, really it's about
And we do have to look into, like I did, look at Shrewsbury's master plan and the housing just to get a local area. And going back to the inclusionary housing, it is very complicated, so I do think before we just do it, and I know you talked about it, we go into more detail. Like their master plan said, study and consider options for simplifying the inclusionary zoning bylaw. So they were a town that adopted it, and now this was 2016, they were gonna have to go back and relook at it, and so it probably wasn't working for them, but I don't know, I didn't call them and ask them what the problems were. But I think before we jump in,
Yeah.
you definitely have to consider the merits and explore it in detail. It shouldn't be something we just jump into willy-nilly here.
Okay, well, thank you, I'm sorry I kept you here longer than I intended, so thank you for doing this. Anything else that you wanted to clarify or add, or?
Just make a closing remark.
Please do.
Okay. Just my main takeaways. I was putting this together all day, and I did this letter like a month ago. I mean, just based on the survey results, traffic in schools are a concern and a top priority. The inclusionary piece, the research I did, the missing middle, I think will make this more of an issue, because the way the recommendations are written, it doesn't touch on 55 plus. So I think we're opening the town up to an influx of families, and like I said, the schools, and even in the master plans, as Peasley and Melican need work. Going back to the CPTC, the Citizen Plan Training Collaborative Workshop, it's obviously not working in other towns. So let's wait, let the dust settle before jumping into this. So I mean, what you just said basically, I think is a perfect example. I mean, if the survey results stated that yes, inclusionary, let's do it, then I wouldn't be here tonight. I already think Northport is doing a good job offering 40B, even though we're 10% on paper, based on what you were saying, Michelle. I think that just seeing the growth in the diversification of other housing options over the last 16 years, I think we've done a good job. So again, we should always stay ahead of that curve, but not a high priority, I believe at this time. And then whether we like inclusionary or not, the survey results again, this is the crux of my letter, the quantitative analysis does not deem this a high priority at this time.
Okay. Thank you, I appreciate you coming and answering any questions.
Okay.
This is really helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually also read the 2012 housing plan, and they said that Northport's done more than most Massachusetts towns to create opportunities for young citizens, working families, and seniors.
Mhm.
So I thought that was a good point too, to show that, you know, the whole plan, you said we could do more with it, but one of the points made was that Northborough has done a really great job, and probably a lot thanks to Rick and all his hard work with the affordable housing. But also, I do think we have to look into density issues.
Yeah, it's a kind of balancing act. Okay, so, there were we touched a little bit on the missing middle component, just as part of this conversation, and that's something we closed with last time talking about. I don't know what our final consensus was. What are we thinking? Are there any thoughts on that based on what we're part of this discussion tonight?
Well, I mean, it goes back to Brad again with the missing middle being its high density. Like even with the letter that Fran sent out with the picture, it showed a lot of high density housing. And I tried to go and look what towns were using missing middle. And I didn't do like tons of research, but the only one I could find was Lowell. And Lowell used it in their old warehouses.
Mm-hmm.
They used it as like form zoning, and then they filled them with, that's where they said they used their missing middle is to infill their old warehouses and their old, which we don't have a lot of in Northborough. So, I mean, missing middle is like quadplexes, and we have people who come to us complaining about duplexes. We've been talking about duplexes for like 3 years, and now we're gonna say, okay, you did your surveys, high density housing was a concern, it was the lowest discussion on the surveys, but you know, we're not listening to you about the duplexes, but let's throw some quadplexes in, you know? I just feel like we represent the residents, and I feel like if I approve something that's gonna allow quadplexes, that I'm not representing them. And for the definition of missing middle, we talked about cottage housing. So maybe we do consider the merits of cottage housing, so that way it's not open up to the whole missing middle, where unintentionally now we get developers coming back saying, well, in harmony with your master plan, I'm gonna do a quadplex, because you're allowing that now, where we say, oh no, we really wanted cottage housing, but our definition says such as cottage housing, and that such as leaves it open to anything. So my concern with the missing middle is, it is meant for urban areas, and I'd just like to either reword that or, just make it more specific. If it's cottage housing that we wanna look into, then let's say that. Why do we say missing middle? That was my concern with it.
Any other thoughts? Anybody?
So I haven't changed my mind on missing middle. I still think it's too broad ranging of a term. And even this attachment or the letter that Fran sent out and had the attachment to one article on it, and it shows an image of what the missing middle is. And it goes at anything from a duplex and what they call live and work, which is basically, I would say urban-based housing buildings. So we talk about even some of the duplexes or bungalows, that I can understand in certain areas and in today's, but where we still have some big parcels in town that will get developed eventually, I fear that this broad-based language leaves us wide open for a developer to come in and say, well, if this isn't your master plan, you guys wanted this live-work, high-density housing, which clearly is not demonstrated in any of the surveys that we've done. So, and I'll echo even Amy, if we wanted to target something that were more specific, lower scale, that was meant for maybe, the downtown area, where it is walkable, where hopefully we'll at some point have more amenities downtown for people to walk to. I think that makes more sense than leaving this broad-based term in kind of the master plan. And so I felt last time we met, and I feel the same now.
I just have one last thing to add. When I did go back to the 2012 housing study, we all should get a copy of it because it's pretty new and it has a lot of information and they have goals in it too. But for our master plan, we have build awareness around accessory dwelling units, which I think is important for senior housing and for ideas. But in part of that 2012, it said encourage small cottage style homes, which I think maybe that's what they were trying to do with missing middle, because we talk about cottage style. So maybe it added to build awareness around accessory dwelling units and cottage style homes, versus the whole missing middle. If that's what the goal is.
Any comment here?
I think I sort of agree with what both Amy and Anthony are saying. That bears consideration.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I continue to struggle with, I'm sorry I keep saying it over and over again, is we have these great intentions, and I'd love to find that, and maybe it's just, we'll never find it, but what's that magic recipe that allows us to do what we want without getting exploited somehow? I feel like the applications we ultimately get, when we try to do something that allows for it, the applications that ultimately come to us have little to no regard for the neighborhood, little to no regard for downtown look and feel. It's just, I want to make as big a structure as I can and make as much money as I can with, I'm going to build it as tall as I can, as wide as I can, and it's in your zoning, we can do it, so we're going to do it. And I struggle with that because this is why the survey says what it does, because people are sick of that and are upset with that. So how do we provide opportunities for people to afford to live here, but not make it so the people that live here suffer? I guess, I don't know if anybody has thoughts about that, or if it feels that way well, or doesn't feel that way, I don't know.
I mean, I think something that you just said, Carrie, is the key, and, Northborough's not unique in its struggle with that.
Right.
When you said, if it says it in the zoning, and that's what this is all about, because again, remember the master plan, is way up here, you know, and it's full of ideas.
Mhm.
And just to, you know, you do what you want about, you know, anything, the master plan, but I mean, the missing middle talks about, you know, cottage cluster housing. I mean, that's in the definition of missing middle. So, just because, I mean, we have cottage zoning in one district, or a cottage, opportunity if somebody wanted to use it, but nobody has. But, you know, forget that we did, and just because the definition, you know, the glossary of terms here says, you know, cottage cluster housing, that's not gonna happen unless you put that in your zoning. So I mean, nothing, you know, anything land use related, you know, whether it's housing, density, we keep talking about density, which is, you know, very high on people's minds, but, none of that is going to happen unless there are zoning tools to allow it. So, you know, you could, let's just say, for example, you left missing middle in there because that seems to be, you know, that's the workforce housing, you know, sort of the people that are shut out of housing markets in many suburbs, you know, east of Worcester. So you leave that general definition in there, and then as a planning board, you know, in conjunction with other boards, you know, through your housing plan and so forth, you determine, okay, do we want density? Do we want increased density in this town? And the answer is yes or no. And then, but density is different to everybody. So if everyone's like, well, yeah, we want to provide some kind of options, whether it's, you know, again, we have accessory dwelling units, but, you know, say it's some sort of, you know, senior housing. Okay, well then, if that's what, you know, one of the highlights of a housing plan is, okay, so now how do we address that? How do we put a zoning bylaw in place that is going to encourage that type of zoning? You know, so it can't get done until there's there's a zoning bylaw that, you know, gives someone the tools to do it.
Yeah.
You know, so just because it says, no matter what chapter it's in the master plan, just because it says it's in the master plan, that doesn't mean it's gonna happen. You know, other things have to be, all the mechanisms of how to accomplish that have to be put in place.
That's true, but then we get an application that says one of the criteria for special permit is it's in harmony with the master plan. And I've never seen anybody say, no, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, of course they're not going to, and of course they're gonna maximize, and,
So,
you know,
yeah.
that's what their job is. You know, your job is to say, well, you know, these are the zoning bylaws that we provided, and this is what we want in this community, so you gotta build according to that.
Yeah.
You know?
Are there any board thoughts on that?
So you could reword H12 to, instead of explore the merits, just say explore tools, right? Which would require a portion of housing units to be set as, you know, something like, if you don't want to include inclusionary in there, you could just do tools. My only point is, if you're gonna get affordable housing and affordable senior housing, you're looking at density. So what are your tools in place, right? So if a developer comes to you and says, I want you to approve this because in your master plan, it says you should have affordable housing and you don't have it. You know, and it's a density or something like that, but you don't have tools in place. I mean, if you don't want to do inclusionary, then maybe use the word tools.
I was wondering if there was another tool, because in the 2012 housing plan, it says their goal, number 3, is establish mechanisms to encourage affordable housing in developments that seek a special permit so that Northbrook can remain ahead of the 10% in the future. Like
That's inclusionary zoning.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
curious.
so it is cool.
It says established mechanisms, I was just wondering if there were other mechanisms.
But the whole thing about the master plan was that we didn't want to go down and be very specific. We wanted to be as general as possible as well.
Well, so it's
Yeah.
interesting because I almost felt like these were specific, like I would rather have some sort of assessment, some sort of housing assessment tell me, based on an assessment of what we need compared to what we can support, compared to what our schools can handle and whatever else, this is what we can do, and then what kind of zoning do we need to go after? And this is already listing the zoning we need to go after without getting like that, number 1 to me should be the assessment. And then figure out the tools, because we have, I mean, one thing that did stand out to me as well is that the inverse relationship between the survey results, what people said, and what we got. It is an inverse relationship.
Yeah.
So what is happening here? Like, how do we bring that together, in a way that, at least shows we're listening? Like Amy said, that people have a hard enough time with duplexes, we've been locking horns on it for years, and so we're gonna just up the ante and put in a mid-rise apartment complex. So I don't know how, I'm not trying to be funny, I guess, I'm just trying to
No.
figure out, how do we manage that?
So are you making a proposal tonight on how to rewrite this while,
No, not necessarily, I'm just wondering, like, what do we, are there certain things, like, do we wanna start with cottage, or do we just wanna say do we wanna specify that it is a needs assessment, it's more than just price points, because I don't think price points to me is not a full assessment. Oh, do you need a copy?
no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so H2-3, I think, Michelle, you went back to inclusionary. And I don't know, do you guys wanna start with inclusionary, or, I was talking about missing middle. And I was thinking, like, just to make it more general, like, investigate housing, such as cottage housing that could address senior housing needs, and also provide housing options for younger residents and workforce housing. I mean, so we're not picking the tool, like you said, we're not picking the tool before we find out if that's the right tool that we need. Like, even when we did the master plan committee, we didn't delve deep into these tools because we didn't have time, but the tools were on here. But I feel like this is the planning board section, and if we're not sure about the tools, even for missing middle, we brought it up 3 times before even the consultants could tell us what it was.
Mhm.
So how are we adding that to our master plan? Like, I think we do have to assess it first. The tool.
Again, just to reiterate that just because goal number 1 is labeled as number 1, that doesn't mean that that's the first goal.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah, no, I
so,
know.
all right.
Right,
So if you're going, I mean, I suggest that, if tonight, if the goal is to get through the housing chapter
It is.
and then hopefully adopt the master plan tonight, starting with, Carrie, what we had worked off of was basically your suggestion changes and then the master plan committee response to those. And I think on H1-2, again, whatever you want to do about inclusionary housing, but one of the reasons why it's in here is because it's really only there's not a lot of zoning tools to explore how to do density and then get the trade-off of affordable units. That's what inclusionary zoning is all about. So, the reason why you might think it's very specific, but it's because it's really one of the only tools in Massachusetts. As a way, if a town wants to, through zoning, create affordable housing. Because otherwise, how affordable housing is created is either through nonprofits in communities, and there are nonprofit builders out there that specifically do this, or you do it through housing authority stock, or which they are no longer funded by the state, unfortunately, or funding is not available to them at this point, and then comprehensive permits. So those are all outside of zoning. So inclusionary zoning is one of the few tools in Massachusetts that is a zoning tool. So if you think it's specific, you could say yes it is, but it's because it's like the only thing out there. If you don't want it in there and you just want to talk about exploring zoning, which would require a portion of housing to be set aside for low, I don't, sort of just to
Okay.
get through H1-2.
Mhm.
I liked how you had explored the merits of Carrie. I think you added that. And I think even the master plan steering committee was okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, or do we want to stick with that and explore the merits of?
I'm good with that.
You guys, what do you?
Yeah, my suggestion is either do that or just say explore tools, and which is even more general than what Kathy says, but like Kathy's right, there is only one tool right now, but
But maybe in 10 or
Yeah.
15 or 20
it could be
years.
something else, yeah. with just a different name on it.
Okay, do we wanna say explore zoning tools, that, the merits of zoning tools that would enable or we're not, the words might get to death, but is that the spirit of, where is inclusionary zoning or what? Tools, zoning tools?
I think leaving it less specific leaves us open for more options, and if it's inclusionary, then it's inclusionary, but you can make those determinations down the road. And whether new tools become available or not, then you can shift gears.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things I looked at, going through some of the pros and cons, was that it is something that the Supreme Court decided not to take it on, but it's speculated that eventually it will come there, that it may be something deemed unconstitutional at some point because that is something that you're violating the Fifth Amendment because you are forcing someone to, you're taking private land and not allowing them to get a just compensation for their land. So there's a big fight over whether or not that's even constitutional to do. So if that comes into the, court in the next few years, and we need to look at other tools, or other tools come up, that may actually help.
So do you wanna, reword it to say explore zoning bylaws, which would require a portion of the housing units be set aside for low and moderate income households?
I like explore the merits.
Or zoning, yeah, I think it was zoning tools.
Oh, zoning tools, yeah.
Well, I mean,
Either way,
a tool is a bylaw, I mean, that,
that's true. Thanks.
so explore the merits of zoning bylaws, which would require a portion of the housing units be set aside for low and moderate income households. Okay.
Okay. Amy, did you have something?
No, I think we're through goal 1. I really like the goals. I think it gets, when you get down to the nitty gritty of the recommendations, that it gets specific.
Okay, so then let's see.
Oh, I have one thing.
Yeah.
And just because I saw it in a lot of bylaws and I saw it in the housing plan, but I don't know if it has to be included in here. But if it did, I was thinking it'd be under goal 1. In the 2002 housing plan, one of the goals was ensure that Avalon and other Chapter 40B eligible developments remain in compliance with their regulatory agreements. And I'm sure Kathy does that all the time, but I did notice it in a lot of the master plans that was always like a recommendation, because like.
Yeah, they have to do that, Amy, they're assigned a regulatory agency, so it's a state agency, that it'll either be, it can be several, but it'll either be like Massachusetts Housing Partnership, Mass Development, trying to think of who, I think there's a third one. Like just as an example, Avalon has to submit a report to me every year. And it also goes to DHCD and it goes to their monitoring agent.
But what if they don't? Like, you have to stay on top of it?
They, it's only for rental. It's not for home ownership. So it's easy for us, for the rental, it's only Avalon. And, they're,
In the
star.
plan, it did say there was one expiring in 2022 to make sure that Northborough kept it on the books. But it wasn't Avalon, it was a different address. I can email it to you. But I just wanted, I just didn't,
plan.
I just didn't know why.
I mean, that's a good point with, for sale properties that are home ownership, because as I told early in the evening, I just already told you when that's deeded one, and now it's marketed the other, right?
Yeah.
And there's no one who can enforce it in town other than the zoning enforcement officer. And I'm not quite sure that's being done or how they can go about doing it, so it's tricky. It's like those unintended consequences, which you had hoped to get something and then turned out that way, so. And when I see something that's affordable, and it comes up as market, I email Kathy and say, it shouldn't be this way. And she usually notifies the homeowner that you can't sell it for fair market rate.
I just noticed it was a goal in a lot of master plans, and it was also a goal in that 2012 housing plan. So I didn't know if we had to bring it to the master plan, because I don't know how many people read the 2012 housing plan.
Because many people are gonna read the master plan, but
Me?
that's aside from the board members.
Okay.
All right, so you do that, you ensure that they stay.
And we're actually certified. We have been certified by the state as we've met our 40B.
Well, it's not so much certification, but there's what's called a subsidized housing inventory that the state publishes, and it depends on the administration. Sometimes they send it out every, generally like every 2 to 3 years to the towns to verify if anything has changed on the list, that was originally provided years ago. I just did it 2 months ago. It was due about a month or so ago. So each community will go through the list and either say, whatever, that, there's really nothing, there's certain kinds of units that come off of it, and I can give you specific examples if you want, but otherwise, it's usually you're always, hopefully adding to it. So like as an example, we have right now in town, because I just did this, otherwise I don't carry this information around. There's 602 units of affordable housing in town. Now, are there really 602 units? No, because, 300 of those 602 are market rate units out in Avalon. So, that number's kind of false. But to meet, what the definition of the state says, we have 602 units. So and I just submitted paperwork to add the 4 Habitat for Humanity units on Main Street. So they were finished, over a year ago, but the state's just updating their inventory now. So, when, in another 2 or 3 years, when the state, submits it back to the town to say any updates, those 4 units should be added. So we would have 606 units. And then you basically, it's just simple math. It's a 600 and right now 602 units. Divided by how many housing units, year-round housing units you have in your community. And that's how you come up with the number. So our number right now is 11.36. And the state's goal is that it's 10%.
I just found the house. It's the one next door here. It says 59 Main Street, has 8 units for young adults. The building is owned and managed by the Bridge of Central Massachusetts. This is the only development with a term limit affordable housing restriction, which will expire in 2022.
Yeah, so individual homes like that have to report to the state, and then that's, then incorporated into the subsidized housing inventory. So as an example, since you bring up the bridge, Amy,
Yeah.
there's other group homes in town.
Yep.
And there's, there's various agencies in the state of Massachusetts that own these homes. And they, however many clients they have is the number of affordable units you have on your list. So there's, right now there's 39 clients in Northborough spread throughout various homes. So that doesn't, again, if you're talking about small a and big A, 39 clients in groups' homes doesn't translate into
39
affordable
houses.
Right, 39 affordable homes.
Yeah.
So, but what can happen with those group homes, and what did happen last year to this year, is a couple of the group homes, it's privileged information, so I don't know exactly what it is, but they'll either lose their license, or they decide that house is no longer working for us. So they'll leave the town and, and they take their clients elsewhere. So that comes off the inventory.
Mm-hmm.
So, a couple years ago, we had like 22 units, so to speak, but it's really clients. And then that dropped to 8. But I know that a couple group homes have recently come into town in the past year. So, they have to report, and that'll get added onto the inventory.
Okay. Did you have something else?
Nope.
Okay, one other thing that I had questions about, and I brought this up last time, but I've been trying to figure out more about it, was just about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, so the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Funds. I'm sorry, municipal affordable housing trust funds, because if we are to use these zoning tools and developers start to say, well, I'm just gonna give you money instead, I'm gonna pay cash in lieu of units, where do towns put this money? And what they use is a trust fund for this money. So I've been trying to figure out, is that something that we would wanna establish, because if we're gonna find these tools, the trust funds have to have by law a board of trustees that oversees it. It's usually, it connects it to the voters so that voters have input through their board of selectmen reps or whatever elected officials. There's a resident at large, a housing authority rep. So it has all these different representatives that are trustees over the money. So I was just trying to figure out, you mentioned before last time, Kathy, that we don't actually have that in town. We don't have an affordable housing trust fund.
We don't have a town of Northborough Housing Trust Fund.
Okay, so when so the money, if we were to do zoning tools, whether it's inclusionary or whatever, and the developer says, I'm just gonna give you $500,000, where would that go?
Well, that would be part of what you would want to figure out, what you would need to figure out. If you were going to do inclusionary zoning, not all towns that have inclusionary zoning have a housing trust.
Yeah.
So it goes into just an account that the finance director would set up, and then, the town would determine, if they want to get it to a certain amount, and then they might put out a request for proposals to say, the town of Northborough has, X amount of dollars. We're looking for a developer, to partner with us to develop housing someplace. I can get you a lot of info on housing trusts if you want, but we actually established legislation through town meeting to have a housing trust in town. And but it goes back to before Governor Romney. So whether people were here in town or not when Governor Romney was here, but it came out of the housing plan. So we worked with the Massachusetts Housing Partnership to put together language to establish a housing trust. And we went to town meeting, and it was approved at town meeting. And then after it was approved, there really wasn't, it was evident that there really wasn't a lot of support to do, it passed at town meeting, but then to actually enact it, there really wasn't a lot of support at the time to do it. So nothing ever happened with it.
So
And then what Governor Romney did was then he, because a lot of towns were starting to look at how do we become housing, partners with housing, affordable housing. So Governor Romney then passed legislation that said, this is the language that all towns, if you want to establish a housing trust, this is the language that you have to use. We did not then go back and adopt that because we already had language. So, and of course all that language has changed, significantly since then. So if you were going to do some sort of, inclusionary zoning bylaw or something to that effect that, in lieu of building units, which is really not the way to go, but if you're gonna say in lieu of building units, we want, this is the formula, X amount of dollars. At that point, you sort of would go hand in hand. You would either look at a housing trust, there's other mechanisms that you could look at too, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a housing trust.
okay.
But-
Well, because I know a lot of communities, like I saw Southbourne Hudson use it as they use a affordable housing trust for their CPA funds, zoning fees, any sort of fees associated with zoning ordinances or anything like that goes into a trust. And there's a board of trustees that sits over that. So like if you were to do an RFP, if we had $500,000 account and we did an RFP, who would be the committee that would say, there would be a trust, board of trustees would be the committee that would review the RFP?
There's no,
Well, it's part of the law. If you have a trust, you need a board of trustees.
well, right, of course, yes, with the board of trustees, but if you didn't have a trust, you would establish some mechanism through the board of selectmen. But
So what do we, I'm just trying to understand for now, so this is what I keep trying to understand. When we appropriate money to affordable housing, it's in an count.
Through the Community Preservation Committee?
Yeah.
Mhm.
But then, so I understand the point in some cases is so that you don't have to come back to, if there's a piece of property, and this is in the trust information as well, if there's a piece of property that comes for sale, you don't have to wait for town meeting, you have your money in the bank that you can use. But who is that committee that when it's time to use that money, that reviews that, you know?
Today, the way the Northborough has it set up is that it's a combination of, first you have to go back to the Community Preservation Committee.
Oh, when you have a project in plan.
Yes, yes, in Northborough's particular instance, we have a housing corporation.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a town board, but there is a nonprofit housing corporation.
Mhm.
You know, member of it here tonight, so I mean, you can get more specific information from him than me. But, so the way it works in Northborough right now is there is a housing corporation that applies for CPA money,
Mhm.
and that money never goes directly to town. It stays with the town. There's a funding agreement. There has to be a funding agreement with any money that the
Right,
CPC, whether it's, you know, what, the three categories, so there has to be a funding agreement in place, and then there has to be a restriction put in place that's recorded at the registry of deeds.
Right.
So, you know, so it has to stay in perpetuity, either affordable housing, historic preservation, or open space. So today, the housing corporation, for example, could apply to the CPC for, you know, X amount of dollars, and the CPC then brings that to town meeting votes on it, and then it stays with the town of Northborough. A funding agreement is signed between the housing corporation and the board of selectmen, and in the funding agreement, it outlines what the process is. So when the housing corporation has a project that they want to work on or, you know, expend dollars on, first they have to come back to the Community Preservation Committee, that committee has to vote, and then the applicant, in this particular case, the corporation, then they have to go to the selectmen. So the CPC then reports to the selectmen, and then
Okay,
the
so
selectmen.
they will operate like a board of trustees in a way. CPC
Yeah, they do, it's just not called the Northborough Housing Trust.
Okay, all right, thank you
But
for
there's
clarifying.
definitely checks and balances.
Oh, no, I didn't think that there
Yeah.
wasn't, I was just wondering, like, for example, residents wanted to put a preference to seniors or people with disabilities, how do they voice that? Like, who are their representatives? Like, whereas a trust, if you had board of selectmen reps, you could go to your board of selectmen and say, I'd really love to have, you know, more preference put on local residents or seniors, and I'm just wondering, like, what's that way that taxpayers can loop back in?
Yeah, sure, they can always contact their, you know, their selectmen, but we have to follow the Federal Fair Housing Act.
Yeah.
So, everyone has to follow that. So, you know, you can't just say, I want this money to go towards, you know, only for senior housing, or even I want, you know, half of it every year to go towards seniors. You can't do that, that's discriminatory. So, any project that comes before the town that we then want to have counted on the subsidized inventory, we have to, you know, conform to the Fair Housing Act, and then work with DHCD on how we run our lotteries and what the income is, you know, the income guidelines that are being used. So the state sets all of that income information.
Well, I think the key is that to get CPA money dispersed, you need a project.
Okay, so it is.
Somebody's gotta come to the CPC and say, I've got a project,
Mhm.
and this happens to deal with affordable housing.
Yeah.
And this is what I wanna do, and this is how much it's gonna cost. Now, so far, the only people in town who've come before the CPC to ever propose projects has been Northborough Affordable Housing Corporation.
Right.
That's
right.
not to say they're the only people that could do it, they're the only people that have done it so far. So then, once you present a project, the CPC has to say, is that an allowable use of the money?
Yep.
For what you say you want to do, is that an allowable use for CPA money? And the CPA money for affordable housing follows certain state guidelines for how they allow CPA money to be used. And so if in fact the project you're doing is allowable under the rules that were set up for affordable housing development under the state, then the CPC, if they agree with the project in general and it conforms to the rules, they would agree to say, from our perspective, we could disperse that amount of money. And then the applicant would have to go before the Board of Selectmen. There'd be a letter from the CPC in their file saying, this is what I want to do. We presented the CPC, they agree. The CPC has confirmed this project meets all the eligibility requirements that the Community Preservation Act requires. So now we just need for you to confirm that what we're trying to do for the benefit of the town, makes sense. But as far as having individuals say, well, I think we ought to do more for senior housing, doesn't really have any traction until somebody
You have
presents
to bring it
a
up.
project.
Yeah.
A group
I
of
see what
people
you're saying.
say, a homeowner says, I've got a piece of land,
Yeah,
and I've got a developer I want to work with, and I want to build X units of housing that's going to be affordable and senior restricted.
yeah.
This is what I want to do, and that would go before the CPC, and they would say, okay, what does the state say about the restrictions you want to put on the property? Is it allowable? Like, for example, to use community preservation money for affordable housing, you can only do 50% local preference. So if you came to the CPC and said, I want to do a project and I want 100% of the units to go to Northborough people, the CPC would say, we can't give you CPA money for that project because the state only allows 50% local preference because the state views affordable housing as a statewide issue, not a town issue.
Got it.
So there's
That
a number of
makes
things you have
sense,
to sort of.
So we don't have to solve that tonight. I was just thinking, like, if we did start to accept money, just like if there's, what's that mechanism look like? I mean, we don't have to solve it tonight, but, that makes sense to me. Thank you. Okay, we're moving on to goal 2. Unless anybody has anything else for goal 1, are we good? Yep, good over here? Okay. Okay, so let me go back, Kathy reminded me we had the memo as well. So I had, put in a line about the pricing, the housing price point study being considered more, as a part of a bigger comprehensive production plan, housing production plan. And, that was explained during the master plan steering committee meeting, that as we just talked about a little earlier, so we don't have to belabor it, but that was more a plan that was a little bit different than I thought it was, so that helped to clarify that. My only point of that was just, I didn't understand why we're sitting at price points. Again, where do we bring in that full assessment? Do we need more than just price points? Because then what if the market changes tomorrow? What do we do with this price point? So I don't know, was the intention just to look at, was it a bigger assessment than that, or was it just?
Well, so the idea was to try and figure out what affordability really meant. We know kind of what the average house price in Northborough is today. The baseline section of the housing report gets into this concept of that if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing-related costs, mortgage, interest, insurance, property tax, that's basically being called cost burdened. And the study showed that there was a significant portion of people, 30+% people in Northborough that are housing cost burdened right now. So that means that they're living in homes that they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing-related costs. So the study was going to take a look at housing in general. One of the things we're going to try and do and say was, what would a reasonable priced house be for the average Northborough homeowner to keep them at 30% or less of their income for housing costs? And then it's an even bigger issue for senior people living on fixed incomes. What would it take? So before we start to talk about what kind of housing we want to build, we need to understand about, is it $200,000 houses, is it $300,000 houses? And when you get an idea about what that's going to be, then you have to talk about how would you actually do that? That if you need more of those kinds of houses in town, how would you go about doing that in terms of what the town looks like, what the zoning looks like, who the partners might be? So the price points were just kind of a way to describe some targets in a bigger strategy discussion of housing in town. But just to say we need less expensive housing is kind of meaningless unless you understand what are the price points that really are affordable in the town of Northborough. And they differ by town and they differ by age group. That's why we didn't particularly include seniors, call them out, because the feeling was this was going to address many different age groups in town. Not to discount seniors, but to include many different kinds of people that could be struggling with trying to find homes where they spend no more than 30% of their income on housing costs. So the price points kind of rose a little bit as being kind of a target that you sort of develop. And then you'd say, once you kind of had an understanding that maybe the average price in town is $480 or $490, whatever it is, but a lot of people in town, if you're talking about 30% of their income going to housing costs, really can't afford more than X. What we don't know is, what is X? But if we think it's important to know what X is, and we start to know what X is, you can start to go plans about how would you create more of X, and what would that look like? And eventually that would lead into, does our current zoning support creation of X, or doesn't it? And if it didn't, would we want to change it or wouldn't we? That's why the theme of H21 is a general strategy on housing, but the price point sort of came out as trying to put some definition around what you'd be aiming at.
So can I, we just talked about a little bit how you talk about, like you have this idea and then these sort of unintended consequences happen as you're evolving, like I didn't think that would happen. In a neighboring community that I've worked with on a project where the developer says, I want some density and I'm gonna make them affordable. And I don't know what the agreement was with the town, but he starts out at like 365 and does something decent, and everybody goes running to it for the affordability part, right? Everybody, right? And they're not affordable because you have to meet a criteria, they're just affordable
It's
because,
different.
Good deal.
yeah, it's a good deal.
That's
Yeah.
little A.
It's like I'm selling
Yeah.
my $500,000 house in Northborough, and I don't have to give the whole 500 away. I can keep 150 in my pocket. Does so well that now he's up to 480,000 2 years later. Because the market just, do you know what I mean? So that's where those housing price points, like Kerry says, they're sort of subjective to the markets, like, because all of a sudden, everybody wanted it, and then there wasn't any land left, and then the prices shot up. So it's really hard to, do you know what I mean?
Well,
So
yeah, that's gonna happen. You still need a place to start.
you're trying to figure out the data,
You just can't say we need more housing at some lesser price.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a nice thing to say, but I think to actually make some progress on deciding what you would do and how would you do it, you need to sort of define, at least in current terms, what most people in town could afford and not spend more than 30% of their income on the cost of it.
My mother-in-law has something like that in her town, but it's run by the town, because if you do it and you sell it, it's gonna go up, people are gonna flip it, like the whole thing of, I want a $200,000 house to help people in this community. We build it, but people are gonna come from everywhere to live there, it's not really gonna help, would it really help the people in this community?
Well, once again, if it's not capital A, if it's not gonna go on the inventory,
Right.
we don't have to follow 50% local preference. I mean, we can do whatever we want if we're doing small A housing. If we start to talk about capital A housing, things on the inventory, then you gotta follow all the state's rules, only 50% local preference, da-da-da-da-da. That's why 2.6 sort of gets it back, and we thought, we always go back and look at what we've done in that in the past, but 2.1, even though it's, I can understand, like, everyone doesn't understand the wording, 2.1 really gets at a local view of housing, trying to define some specifics or all we wanna do, and then once we do it, we can define any rules we want for how we wanna build it. You know, like Michelle said, land cost is a significant driver of housing costs. But we have a certain amount of municipal owned open land in town. So what's not to say, at some point, that as part of this plan, the town might put on the table certain property at no cost to the developer, with the agreement for the developer, that a certain amount of housing that looks a certain way, priced at a certain point, is created.
Well, I think to keep it fair, like their town does, it had to be run by the town, because, like, say she could go in and buy it for 300,000, she could never sell it on the market. It has to go back to this group and the town, and they give it to someone else more affordable.
Right.
Because if it's sold outright,
Then it's
then
no
it's
longer
it's
that
not.
point.
That's possible, so that means
Once.
there'd have to be an investigation of what the administration of this would be, what the impact would be on the town budget, and if it was all worthwhile, you're right. But the point is, so there's all these paths you go down. All H21 is trying to say is, we ought to discuss it, open it up, and go down the path.
Yeah, so I
So-
definitely agree with that sentiment, I just didn't understand that, so I heard what the Master Plan Steering Committee said about this one, and that made sense to me, that I don't need to tag on to be considered as part of a comprehensive housing production plan. But I do think that we need some, like, just exactly what we're saying here, we need a starting point, and we need some sort of assessment. I don't know if this gets that across, or do people just think we're doing, okay, what's the price of housing today when it may be different tomorrow, I don't know, if there's some sort
Well,
of.
I mean, you could change, you could, at the end of that sentence there, you could say, determine the types of housing meet these price points as part of a larger overall housing strategy.
Yeah, something like that, I just
Yeah.
feel like bring it
I mean,
into
be-
something.
you know, your sentence, Carrie, I mean, what you added, Carrie, to be considered as part of a more comprehensive housing production plan. Just take out the word production.
Yeah, it just didn't make, I understand how it didn't make sense.
You know,
right?
and just, well, it's not that it didn't make sense, it's just that the housing production plan, like, is a
It
different
was a
animal,
different
and
one.
how would you know about that, you know, unless you do housing,
I
so.
think in the last month we've learned a lot.
So I
You know,
think,
because we've asked you about all this.
so I think, you know, you could, you know, again, just take, out of what you suggested, Carrie, is just take out the word production. And it's to be considered as part of a more comprehensive housing plan.
Is the board okay with that?
Yeah, I think that.
Alright.
Sure.
Okay, the next one was, so, and then this is the part I had trouble with H2-1, leading into H2-2, and it only goes back to the fact that, what I said before about exploiting bylaws. So I know I don't even have it written in here because I crossed it out. I think H2-2 is take the results of the price plan and create bylaws,
I
whatever.
don't think it said create bylaws, it just said,
And,
make sure anything comes out of 2-1 is consistent with zoning.
to,
I think, so I guess the point was not to make the zoning conform to what comes out of 2-1, just to make sure anything comes out of 2-1, you know, if it's not doable with zoning, that would then cause discussions to happen with the planning board about how much of this does the planning board actually want to implement, so.
But I think the way it was read, it was
Yeah, it was
kind
written kind of funky.
of like make sure that it,
I'll tell you,
I have it too, I call them master plans.
Consistent.
I'll tell you.
I've got it. It said, review the town zoning bylaw to ensure consistent with the housing study in 2-1.
And it ensures pretty,
Yeah, so
Strong
you know what I didn't
language.
like about it? So, in this case, you know, a lot of the other boards had commented, well, that's just a part of our regular process. So that's what we do as part of our regular routine, like whether it's about the facilities or the schools. So, you know, school committee said, well, why would I add that? That's what we do. Or board of selectmen said, why would we add that? Not the board of selectmen, but a representative, well, that's what we do anyway. Or Kathy, maybe you said, DPW does that anyway. So, but zoning is what we do anyway, so I don't know why for this particular bullet we would add, we'd ensure it's consistent with zoning, because we're gonna have to go back and ensure all of this is consistent with zoning. So it's just sort of, it's just part of our regular process, and I think VHB had said that this entire plan is followed up with zoning. So it doesn't make sense to me that we would specify it for one particular bullet.
Yeah, I see your point.
You know, it's just kind of a.
But by the same token, we shouldn't replace it with calling out, like I said before, the reason we didn't call out seniors specifically was because we wanted to consider all age groups in town, but as we mentioned in the, whenever we sent back to you, Kara, if you wanted to add a few words,
Yeah,
you know,
that's
at
right.
the end of 2-1 to call out seniors, that way we could.
So, okay, so let's go back to the,
The H2.
yeah, so that, to me, was a strikeout. I don't know how the rest of the board feels about that. That was the zoning, but I think that's just part of our regular process. That's what we do. This whole thing, we're gonna.
take the original if you need it. Do you want the original?
Oh, yeah, no, that's okay.
I think that, again, you know, your decision, but I think the reason, if I remember correctly, Carrie, the reason why that it was in there was to give people that were reading this a level of comfort that, you know, it's gotta go back. You know, you have to go back. You know, housing is a touchy subject with a lot of people, so,
But all of these bullets have to go back. The zoning tools have to go back. The exploring any sort of use or anything goes back, or.
but I think it was just you know, again, you can strike it if you want, but I think it was just a, kind of like a reminder to people, you know, this this isn't just gonna happen. You know, it has to,
I think we should strike it, because I think it's, and I do think the people who want it will go back. It's kind of like the town common. The original master plan called out the town common, and we kept going back. Like, if the people who are, and Rick works really hard on housing, so if
So-
it's something he feels strongly on, he's gonna come back,
so if you want
whether or
to,
not it says it in the bylaws.
so if
in
you
the
want to
master plan.
strike it from there, it would also be stricken from page 9-7, which is the implementation chapter.
Yes.
So is that,
Is that what, I
is
mean,
that what you're doing?
it just seems like a redundant.
alright, so you're striking
H2-2.
and then, also striking it from the implementation chapter.
Well, we would have to, anything that we change here is revise and implementation, right, automatically, you don't have to like. do it.
Well, that's true too.
I hope not. 'cause-
No, but that, yeah, that,
I
no,
said it
you're
was
right.
gonna be short, so I don't wanna, okay. All right, in terms of the, bullet for seniors. So I did listen to some of the conversation about, adding separate groups in here, whether seniors or people with disabilities and all of that. So I took the time to follow up with both of those groups and learn a little bit more about, their challenges and their thoughts on, Northborough in the future. And, I was thinking in retrospect, I wish that we had considered a goal, something like to be an age-friendly community where we plugged in, we looked across multiple things. So we looked at transportation, housing, facilities, but for seniors specifically tied to something like being an age-friendly community. We don't have something like that in here, but I think it's important that we.
It's so funny because you're just saying that, but I looked at Shrewsbury today, and I have it in front of me. Shrewsbury's master plan actually has a recommendation that says identify and reduce or eliminate barriers, if any, to being an age-friendly community. Like,
Right,
as
yeah.
an age-friendly community, is that a community like Red to Farm? Like, is it a specific thing?
No, but it's the buzzword.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
a
everyone,
buzzword.
there's no, you don't go find a law that says, age-friendly, or there's not a program how to be an age-friendly community, but it's sort of like a generally accepted term.
So, it's more than just housing, to be an age-friendly community. But of course, we're just looking at the housing section now, but that was just something in retrospect that I wish we really thought about, like, how do we be an age-friendly community? And maybe it's not just on one end of the spectrum, it could be at any age, like, how do we be an age-friendly community? Anyway, back to the seniors. I do believe that it is important to call them out separately because they are 25% of the population. Their needs are unique. They're, they've been giving us input that they have, certain needs, there are certain situations. It's not like anybody else. They can't wake up tomorrow and get a different job. They're retired, they're fixed income, and that is their situation. And, one thing I mentioned last time that there wasn't a council on aging representative on this committee. So there wasn't that person dedicated to, I realize that some people are of the age of seniors, but.
Of the master plan committee?
If I may, Madam Chair.
Oh, please, yeah, sure.
The chair of the Master Plan Steering Committee, Fran Backstrand, was a long time, or serving member
I know,
on
she
the
mentioned
Council
that,
on
she
Aging.
mentioned that, but.
She serves at Bay Path Elder Care Services.
That's,
She's
and I
probably
recognize
the
that.
most familiar with elderly concerns of anybody in this town.
Well, no,
or
she
close
did
to
mention that, and I recognize that,
Well, I
but
just,
she wasn't
it's been
there
said
in that
several,
capacity.
it's been said several times that there wasn't representation on this committee
for
for that
council on aging.
demographic. I would argue that that is not true.
No, my comment is there wasn't a representative from council on aging. So every other committee and board had a representative, but not the council on aging. They did, I don't know.
Well, no, there were a lot of boards that weren't
Yeah.
represented.
Okay,
but-
well, they're big, they're 25% of our population. They have their connection to the town is council on aging, and they didn't have a representative.
Well, what about adopting, Shrewsbury's language?
Yeah,
It's up
it's up to you guys.
But where?
as like H27.
No, well, so I just plugged it in from H2-2 before, which was work with the
Oh,
council
yeah.
and, it was my edit before, which was, work with Council on Aging, Friends of the Senior Center, and other representatives of the senior population to explore housing options that could best accommodate their unique housing needs and to develop a comprehensive senior housing plan. I think it keeps getting kicked down the road. We keep kicking the can down the road on the plan for seniors.
And after the age-friendly community Shrewsbury did have, work with the Shrewsbury Housing Authority to increase inventory of accessible senior housing units. So, I mean, they did call out seniors too. So I think it's good that if you call out the seniors there. And a lot of seniors were at that first meeting, the big one at the middle school.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't they have the pin zone that said 25%?
I don't think they have the first meeting.
Oh. But there were a lot there, and there were a lot of seniors. So I like your.
I don't know.
We're gonna take the wording that was proposed for H2 too,
Right,
and
I'm
just
just gonna
move
have
it
the
up
board
as
talk
the
first.
last.
I just want the board's thoughts first. Thank you. Do you have any thoughts on that? Just in terms of seniors in general, or?
I think it's a good point to bring it up as a
No, I-
separate entity.
Yeah, I agree. And are you saying, Kathy, that you can't bring it up because, concerns are discriminatory, or you can bring it up because Shrewsbury did it?
Oh, no, just when we were talking about using public money.
Oh, yeah.
There's, there's all sorts of
Plan.
strings
Yeah.
with public money,
Yeah, okay.
I don't know, any thoughts, Anthony?
I like the language you just used.
Yeah,
So with how it's written, there, Carrie, work with senior groups and representatives to understand and explore housing options that could best accommodate their unique housing needs.
And to develop a comprehensive senior housing plan. Or I don't know, is that too much, or?
Yeah, because I think that would be part of your housing plan, because you're gonna be looking at all demographics.
Well, the one thing that I've seen other towns do, is I know I talk about grants all the time, but they get grants to do a senior housing plan, or they get grants to come in and have these forums with seniors and figure out what would work, and then go back and create some sort of plan or assessment. And I don't want to lock us into some sort of formal, cumbersome plan, but if there is some sort of grant where we can do a senior housing specific plan, obviously what we've been doing hasn't been, I don't know if it's been working or not, but if we could get people actually look at that specifically and help us.
Well, just as a side note, the only group that in probably, 30 years that's developed senior housing, public senior housing, is the Affordable Housing Corporation.
So it's great. How do we leverage that further? Is there something we can do that?
They're gonna keep going.
The point is, nobody is doing anything about housing in town. The reason we formed the corporation was that there was community preservation money accumulating, the 10% every year was being stuck in a fund, and nobody ever presented a project.
Yeah.
And so eventually Fieldus and Town that had an interest in it, put this nonprofit together and try to figure out some ways to do some meaningful spending of the money.
Yeah, and that's great. So how do we expand on that? If we had a grant to do a senior housing plan and we got all these great ideas of things we could do, and then we partner with someone like Northborough Affordable Housing to say, look, well, let's broaden our view. Let's see what we can do for this group, because it's 25% of us, and we got to do something. We can't not have them be represented. So that was my one constituency that I tried to learn more about. And the other one, because I heard the Master Plan Steering Committee bring it up and said, well, what about people with disabilities? And that brought in, speaking to a couple of different parents with adult children with disabilities, speaking with the president of Pathways to Housing for adults with autism. And we have a huge problem in our, not just Northborough, across the U.S., with just increasing number of kids with autism that are now coming out of the high school. We have like 17% not with autism, but with some sort of special needs or IEP. And that's a pipeline for us that in 10 or 15 or 20 years, they're going to be in our housing market. So what do we have set up for them? And I learned there were so many different things that I think it would be valuable to even sit down with, if we had some sort of committee that even looked at the housing needs of people with disabilities, because I learned about all these different areas. It could be your accessory dwelling units, which we already have, but we're not thinking about, they need to be a certain size to accommodate a caretaker. So our bylaws say 700 square feet. Is that big enough for 2 bedrooms? I don't know, but these are things like, we need to know today so that we can make bylaws that, help people. And I don't think we have that information. That was another thing I just thought of. Do we want to also talk to that group as well, because they have unique needs. They're not going to wake up tomorrow and be in a different situation. Whereas other groups, I feel like, do have the potential to be in a different situation tomorrow. So I was looking at it from the lens of how do we take care of the groups that can't change the situation, they can't wake up tomorrow and not have a disability.
Do you make it more broad in language to whether it's underserved or broadly disadvantaged, or, I think, because there's probably a lot of people who fit in
Yeah,
with different
right.
language, and I don't know, I'm just thinking maybe leave that so it's more wide-ranging.
So instead of seniors, they
No,
work,
that was actually, well, so the seniors I was leaving as is, but the master plan steering committee had said, well, then you have people with disabilities. So then I went and, wanted to hear from that group, and I wondered if we should even add at H27 of just create a committee to research the unique housing needs of people with disabilities.
I think you have to be more, in some ways specific on how you define disabilities, because there
Yeah.
are people that don't have what would be considered necessarily a conventional disability, but let's say somebody's in a treatment program, or in rehab, it is
That's a great point.
medically designated as a disability. So do you want to open up that option for people who, they need housing, but did you not see that could be
What if we leave it as more of a explore
Yeah.
disadvantaged disabilities, and to identify those
Pros
groups
and
and how to
cons.
better serve them, or something to that effect?
Or maybe just explore pros and cons, so that we're just getting the information to then make a decision of how we want to.
I feel like we need to know some of that stuff just for zoning that we're doing now.
Sure.
Just,
I agree.
if we
Yeah.
need to have accessory dwelling units be X size for people with disabilities because they need a caretaker, or a senior person because they need a caretaker, we could solve that, knowing now we've closed the warrants closed, but we could solve that if we knew it, but I had no idea, so how do that information?
Yeah.
Right
so
now, our
how to define
accessory dwelling
disabilities and-
It has to be attached, or it has to be a barn like already built. And I did have someone actually ask me too, why does it have to be a barn that's already built? Because, what could we build a little, they have these things called granny pods now, I guess, that you can have for seniors, they're like 800 square feet. And you order them, you deliver them, they plop them, but that wouldn't fall under our bylaws because it isn't already on property.
well, they don't need mass building code either,
Yeah.
nor do the tiny homes
Oh, the
that
granny
everyone
homes.
wants.
So you couldn't do it?
Yeah, no, you're right, today, our granny pod, like what you see when you go on the internet, doesn't meet mass building code, has nothing to do with Northborough.
Yeah.
But I think just getting back to, the senior, clause, and
Yeah.
then
Okay.
there's a whole, and it's absolutely not my territory, but just like anything that you talk about, there's a whole language that goes with it. And disability is not a word that you use, and disadvantage is not a word that you use. I don't know what the proper words are, I just know those aren't words that we would use. So it was nothing that was ever discussed, so I don't even have a base to like say, okay, how should we word, a new recommendation about that. I can certainly talk to the consultants, I've extended the contract like 3 times, but
Oh, yeah.
but I can certainly, because there's, you need to have the correct language. And then like Millie said, are you just talking about certain types of population, or whether someone is in a wheelchair or in a sober house? Are you talking about the same thing? So.
Yeah, that's a good thought,
I
that's
think
a
it
good-
might be a bigger discussion than.
So if it's not here, how do we make sure we do get stuff like that filtered to us? Because I feel like that's really important for us to understand, and
I don't know, let me do some research. Let me find out if,
well, that
You know-
specific sentence, create a committee to research the unique housing needs of people with disabilities. That was in my discussion with the president of the Pathways to Housing for Autism. And I don't know, she doesn't mean she's expert on wording, but that wasn't like offensive to her or anything that didn't sound out of the ordinary of how they were described. I don't know if disadvantage would be a.
Shewsbury has something, and I just looked at it now to see if they had anything, because I brought it with me. They have and I don't know if it has to do with disabilities. It says, conduct an independent livability policy and practices review. I don't know if independent living is what they meant by it, I don't even know what they meant by it.
And I mean, we could always fine tune it later, we don't have to hold up a plan for it, but the only thing that struck me was, you know, to not have a housing plan. Right now, the housing plan for, parents with children, adults with disabilities, is that they can't ever die, because there is no plan for their children when they do it. So, I feel like if we need to do something or can do something, or just be aware of it at a minimum, then maybe that's something that we can start to think about. All right, so maybe, I don't know if maybe just put like an open placeholder for something like that, and we'll just make sure, you know, it's something we can always come back around to. I just wanted to bring it up because I heard the master plan steering committee talk about it.
So for the new H22, work with senior groups and senior representatives to,
It says work with council on aging, friends of the senior center and other representatives.
where are you picking up? I don't
I'm
have
just
the
reading
right-
off what Carrie gave last time.
That's not what,
I have what Carrie
application.
gave.
Oh, I don't know.
So I don't care what it's, I mean, it's not that I don't care what it says, I mean, where are you?
I don't know where I
So
got
what
it.
Carrie
I'm just
said-
trying to-
I thought it was what Carrie gave.
I'm just trying to write this. I mean, what I have, Carrie, from you is work with senior groups and representatives to understand and explore housing options that could best accommodate their unique housing needs. So all I did was add another senior in there, where you say work with senior groups and senior representatives to understand and explore housing options that could best accommodate their unique housing needs.
Okay.
Is that what you want to add as H2, everyone? H2 too?
Well, should we the one thing I did want to do, and maybe this is what you're thinking, is do we want to add something like council on aging, so that.
Well, after senior representatives, sure, I could say including council on aging.
And maybe the friends of the senior center.
I cut and pasted, so maybe I added in
Oh,
some of my
I
stuff.
don't think you could add the friends, we're not part
Yeah.
of the town.
I was just
Oh,
gonna say, it's more of a
We're a
fundraising.
501c3
Yeah.
independent organization,
Okay, that's
so
fine.
you don't wanna put us down.
Yeah, so
All right, so what you
including
have is good.
including council on aging to understand and explore.
Can we just put your name, Henry?
I'm not on council of aging.
Okay. And so now we come back to H2-3. This is our missing middle. So why don't we wrap this up? We talked a little bit about doing cottage housing. We talked a little bit about, Anthony, some of your concerns. Michelle or Mary, do you have anything in this area?
And like I said, cottage housing is in the missing middle definition.
So missing middle is specifically for housing ownership, correct? Not for rental, not for.
No, it can be.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be ownership. It just means a certain segment of the population. I mean, missing middle could be, young, could be
Mhm.
middle-aged, could be senior.
Mhm.
It's basically, people shut out of the housing market, and then how, across the country, missing middle is, how people address missing middle is as varied as it can be. San Francisco would say, it's gonna be 300 units per acre, and, the first 3 floors have to be commercial, and the rest is housing. Northborough or Rutland or, someone more rural, might say, like the cottage, right now, this is just no specific example of Northborough, but, say our zoning is, 1 unit per acre. So you might say, oh, okay, well, in a certain part of town, we're gonna say that it's, there's a lot of contingencies that you put on it, but, it might be 4 units per acre. So you get density and and then you have design standards and, this whole slew that would go along with it.
In that population, though, it's people who are renting, people who are maybe leasing, is that correct?
So zoning doesn't have anything to do with ownership,
Yeah.
right? So you could build 100 of these,
Mhm.
sell 50 and rent 50. zoning has nothing to do with ownership.
Right,
Yeah.
so I guess what I'm asking, which is kind of getting to this, is in that, criteria or number for missing middle, or even for units that are counted, I was curious as to whether any of the, housing such as, senior care living housing, or nursing home, or skilled care rehab facilities, people rent those apartments, and they occupy them. Are those counted as housing units?
On the subsidized housing inventory?
Or
that
not
what you mean?
subsidized, no, just in general, housing units available to
So the assisted living
population.
guy that's gonna want, the assisted living that they propose, but never hasn't come to fruition yet. If he was going to build that and there was 20, and they go in and they rent them, is that unit considered, are you saying like a housing unit?
Yeah,
Or is that just a building which?
I'd have to check with the assessors. I don't know how they would, it all depends, I think, if they have individual addresses. I mean, there's a number of factors, so I really, I don't know.
I was just
I-
curious
right.
whether you.
Yeah, I can find out
40
really,
of
but I don't know if it's,
Coleman House could have 60 of them.
right, I don't know if it's counted as one building,
I
you know,
don't
when
know.
it is one building with many units inside it, or is it counted as individual, you know, because they're, even though they're in a common building, they're like standalone units,
They are,
like, you know?
yeah. So I was just curious as to if those are pulled into the availability numbers.
You know, that's an interesting question, because traditionally, you would see that like in an Avalon, it's one building, but many units in there, and it has their own things, so each one's counted as a unit. But because these are such new, you know, as to the housing
Entities.
environment,
Yeah,
you're right, it may not be something that, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'll check with the assessors, I mean, just for a point of reference.
just curious.
Was that related to missing middle, or just a question?
Just the question that maybe do some of these units qualify as missing middle options? I don't know. I wouldn't, you know, I don't know. I'm just, or are they just or are they even counted as inventory for senior living options? Because they're certainly used for senior living options.
Well, there was an original bylaw, H2-1, and instead of ensure, but you can use like explore the merits of the creation of certain types of ownership that is inherently more affordable to seniors aging in place, first-time home buyers, and working professionals. Like, is that what mixed middle is for?
Missing middle?
Oh, missing middle.
I think that's what the intention of it was in the master plan, is how I would read
Is
it.
that, like, maybe it would sound better like that versus calling out missing middle, something like exploring certain.
Well, it's intended to serve that audience, right?
Yeah, I think so. Isn't that what
Kathy?
missing middle is for?
To serve, repeat the audience?
This one said,
Yeah, it's all about
certain types of ownership that is inherently more affordable to seniors, aging in place, first-time home buyers, and working professionals. Like, with
Yeah,
that,
because I think what I get wrapped up in is I look at that word, I type it in, and then I see, like, you have a picture here, actually, that Fran sent us. Do you mind?
Okay.
And then I pull up this picture, I type that in, and I see this picture, and it has triplex, fourplex, multiplex, and that is definitely not what people were asking for. So, you know, but the heart of it is to provide that kind of
Exactly.
housing. So I like that, I want to provide that housing, but I don't want it to turn into, well, it's in the master plan that we need to have multiplexes. So here's my multiplex application, and I'm gonna jam it in that small little lot downtown. So does that make sense?
So, Rick, would you think the way Amy read it, it was very broad-based, like that one, but then the missing middle part gets more descriptive, right? So, which, I understand why we're doing it, you know, there's a goal with it, but do you think by taking it out and just keeping what Amy read off, would that affect the goal that you're trying to achieve, or is it, do you feel like you have to be that very specific?
No, I think once again, the view of the master plan committee was to include as many optional types of housing things as possible, just a couple of more waterfront.
Yeah.
Not to basically put a value judgment on which were good or which were bad, just to outline a number of things that could be evaluated. So my sense would be, we could either change that to wording that Amy suggested, or it could just delete. If people are very uncomfortable with that terminology and not have a good way of defining it, just delete that particular recommendation altogether.
Maybe that would be the easiest.
Well, can you
Because I think the rest of the
The
recommendations
original
cover
was a
pretty
different
broad.
bullet, so I don't even know what it had to do with the
The,
missing middle.
the original, reads, identify appropriate areas for missing middle housing.
Okay, that was the original.
Yeah, and then
But
there
what
was
that?
another bullet that said, talking about the creation of certain types of rent ownership developments that are inherently more affordable to seniors aging in place, first-time home buyers, and working professionals. And it seems like that was like a key goal. Did we say that anywhere else?
Where are you reading that from, Amy? That's not in our
This
master-
is the 213 master plan. I was reading back to try to get less specific.
I thought you just said it was a recommendation here.
No, it's not a recommendation here. It's a recommendation from further past on the master plan that it was striked out, I guess it's not in here anymore, but I thought if that's what we were trying to say, maybe we say something more general like that. But do we have that already in here somewhere else? Like, I think a key thing out of the surveys were people wanted homes to look into housing for like first-time home buyers, for seniors, for, working professionals. So is that the type of housing we're looking into for missing middle? So instead of just saying missing middle, we just say we wanna look into housing for first-time home buyers, seniors, and, working professionals.
Yeah,
Or do we
that's all missing middle. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you wanna spell out missing middle instead, I mean, that's what you're doing.
Yeah, or
So-
just, I don't,
So
I guess.
how is that worded, Amy?
Well, it's changed in the front. It said ensure, but I was just saying, like explore the creation of certain types of housing that is inherently more affordable to seniors aging in place, first-time home buyers, and working professionals. And does that hit your workforce? I mean, you said the workforce is like a,
Professional thing.
What about, well, you originally had a lot to say about, what is something like that sound like to you?
No, I see that I like a lot.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm just more concerned, and maybe I'm not even correct in this, but I think missing middle is gonna leave us open to, like, unintended consequences, as a lot of people have said tonight, about different things. Because it's not that simple. Missing middle encompasses a lot of things, and I think the way what Amy just read to me, it still addresses the same people, but doesn't leave in the quadplexes and the different things. It doesn't have that kind of language that a developer could back into and say, wait, this is what you guys have in your master plan. So, not to say that it automatically makes it approved, but it gives them leverage to do things maybe that we didn't want them to do, or the town, the residents weren't looking for as a result.
So Amy, I'm sorry, I have to explore the creation of certain types of housing.
that is inherently more affordable to seniors. This one says seniors aging in place, comma, first-time home buyers.
Wait a minute,
Oops, sorry.
I'm not a stenographer. Okay, that is inherently more affordable.
To seniors aging in place, comma, first-time home buyers, comma, and working professionals.
Okay.
I think the beginning in February, I think it went along with the price point study.
A lot of things that came in and out.
Okay, so that's the new H23?
What is that? I mean,
So,
what do you guys
I'm just
think?
curious about working professionals, who does that
I know,
exclude?
I mean,
Who are you targeting with working professionals? I mean, that's
Well,
everyone.
yes.
This is why we got stuck in
Yeah,
I can see it,
Yeah,
yeah,
bring
I
it
can
back.
see you guys.
No
Oh
matter
my
how
God.
you phrase it, somebody can always say either it doesn't include somebody or it
Yeah.
includes
Or,
too much or
or
whatever.
who does that mean?
But
That's
isn't the
anybody.
attention like police, teachers?
That's how the state used to define it, when,
Oh.
in the 80s and 90s, they would talk about, people shut out of the housing market. People would be, well, who is that? And people would, the state would respond, well, that's your police, your fire, your teachers, your town
Oh.
employees, And then people got hung up on that,
Oh my
you know, well, I know a cop that, you know,
He makes
works at DT, you know.
$100,000, yeah.
So then
So,
people sort of got away from that, and then it kind of became more of this, you know, workforce housing.
Okay.
And then again, if you're not sort of in the biz, people are like, well, what's workforce housing mean?
Yeah.
And then you kind of go to, not that it's an extreme, but then you talk about, well, working professionals. Well, you
Okay.
know, that could be, you know, the Amazon
Could be
CEO is a
doctors,
working
I mean,
professional.
we're all
I know,
somewhere
or, you
along
know, But I mean, it's, again, it's just a way, like Rick said, you know, you could really go down.
Get something on,
You know,
yeah, I get it.
I mean, on any one of these, you can go down
Yeah,
a
I'm
real.
gonna make it a 6-hour meeting.
Right.
We're not gonna do
So should we just leave
So,
it
so no, I mean,
as
I
seniors aging in place of first-time homebuyers and take
no,
out the
because
word?
you don't just want first-time home buyers. Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not just first-time home buyers, you know? You know, it might be someone who could have, you know, could have afforded a house up in, that's not even proper English, but, you know, out in the boondocks, but then they come to Northborough, and they might have been a home buyer there, but, you know, they're shut out of the housing market here, but they're a working professional.
Well, there are a lot of people who get
So-
divorced too, they want to stay close to their family,
Yeah.
so they are separate, but they want to live close by.
So I mean, I think,
But you can't write
again,
that.
it's a,
Well, the
You
point of
can't.
if the point of H two
Divorces.
one is to look at all those different price points for ownership for all different people, does that actually cover that inherently? So that we don't have to, I mean, again, I know it seems silly that we would, or maybe not silly, but to focus on, well, missing middle, but just being on the side of receiving the applications, that's exactly what happens. Like, and all of a sudden, our hands are tied because we said missing middle, and now it's in the master plan, and now this application is just turned into a monster. And it's hard for us to untangle that when it's out there. So I think we all sound like we want to explore those options, but we're just afraid of the language that's gonna trip us up. So
So do you think H2-1 covers what I
you
just
think it
said?
covers that?
That's the intent of H2-1.
So do we just leave it at H2-1, or do we spell it
I
out?
think we just drop H2-3
Just
over.
take H2
Yeah.
Take it out, H2-3?
Take it.
It's spending this much time for us to try to deceive
Oh my
it.
God.
God forbid
All right.
somebody else reads it for the first time.
After Kathy just wrote it all down.
that's all right.
Sorry, Kathy.
That's fine.
Okay, the other one we had, it was H2-5, it was just adding while maintaining.
Oh,
Sorry.
Good.
So you're deleting, let's just complete that,
H2-3.
you're deleting H2-3.
What do you wanna do?
So now you're into H2-5?
Yeah, so on H2-5, I was wondering if we could change the wording to go guided by zoning and meets, so add the word meets, design standards, incorporating housing into downtown to attract residents, and then take the rest out while maintaining the existing character in downtown neighborhoods. And can I tell you why?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, first I think, how do you measure what's considered sufficient to support the economic viability of your downtown? It's really hard to measure, but more than that, after this most recent applicant that came before us, I just feel like it's gotta be broad like that. It's gotta, you've gotta meet design standards to get something like that that's gonna
Well,
have
you
that
can
much
only have
design.
design standards in a historic district, otherwise it's design guidelines. So you can't meet design guidelines. I mean, you can't, you know, even design standards, they have to be in a historic district. In order to say you can do this, you can't do that, you know, it's not just about paint color, but you know,
I know,
it's, you know, and then another way to do design standards is if you had form-based, what's called form-based zoning.
Mhm. I've seen that in certain
Yeah,
towns, you'll
and
see that.
we don't have that
I have something
right now.
that
so
might
you
help
can't
with what
say
you were
meets
saying, Michelle.
design standards or guidelines because you can't, cause it's not enforceable or it's.
No, you can, I mean, how, you know, guided by design, I mean, that's okay, the way that it's
Yeah.
written. But design standards, and ours are called guidelines, because they're not enforceable, because it's not,
In a historic district.
Right.
Yep.
Mhm.
So we could say it meets design guidelines instead of standards, or?
yeah, I mean, it's okay that way. I mean, the master plan committee, you know, agreed with the, changes that Carrie had made.
You know what I thought for H2-5? I think we needed to, cause after thinking of what you guys had in front of design review, I was reading it. It said, I thought we should write with this H2-5 after receiving the results of the downtown visualization study. Cause we're doing a downtown visualization study and it's gonna lay out, do we want commercial, do we want housing, how tall is it gonna be? Like, I thought, before we start incorporating housing into the downtown, we should do that visualization study.
Well, you have housing in the downtown.
Oh, I know,
In
I know,
today's
but
zoning, you allow that.
right,
So don't get hung up on, like, just because 90 West Main Street came along. Do not get hung up on that. If all the boards do their jobs right, 90 West Main Street is not gonna look like what was presented to the design review committee. If the boards,
well, it's just that, I mean,
Do
it
their
happens, and yeah, and
And
then,
the other thing is these goals aren't ordered in a particular way,
Yeah.
they're just statements of things that need to be done.
right,
When the implementation committee gets together, starts to look at this thing, the timing of what'll happen when,
right,
what happens, so you really can't say that this one's dependent on something happening before it.
I mean,
Well,
ju-
when I-
just as general about a downtown, and you know, people talk about various downtowns that they love all the time. And part of the reason why they're successful downtowns is because there's density and there's mixed use. Because you can't just have a downtown, and this is like anywhere across the United States, this is not unique to Northborough. You know, you can't just have a downtown that has my, you know, my local bookstore that I like to go to, my coffee shop, my ice cream store, my sub shop that I like to go to. You can't just have,
what about Concord?
you can't, there's tons of housing in Concord.
But it's not
Look
like
at all
a
those,
city.
look at all the floors on some of those buildings. I mean, there's like 3 stories, you know,
Yeah.
there's housing
I mean,
there.
mixed use makes
Downtown
sense.
Hudson, downtown Westboro, downtown Marlboro, you know, Nantucket.
It just
You
seems
know,
like ours
everyone
does
loves
seem
Nantucket.
silly if you
Yeah.
look at the 90 and then you have Dunkin' Donuts, like ours, we don't have the front, the
Right,
high.
Right, but
So-
if that's what you want, if you want a vibrant downtown, this is not me saying, oh, this is what I would like Northborough to be. It's economics. If
Right,
you want a vibrant downtown, there has to be mixed use. There has to be more than just the person driving by that's gonna support those businesses. There has to be a mass in your downtown that is going to help support those. I mean, we have a downtown business owner, you know, you have to have that mass. What that mass is and what that density is, that's different for every town, you know? And that's part of, you know, going back to your last meeting, that's part of what, you know, this market analysis that we're, you know, should be, you know, doing as part of this whole downtown. Is that's gonna determine, okay, you know, you have X amount of population in Northborough, you have X amount of cars going down, you know, Route 20, you have X amount of cars, you know, within so many miles, the income levels of so many people. You know, I mean, it's, on one hand, it's why, like up at Northborough Crossing, you know, there's not a Restoration Hardware, and there's, you know, there was a dress barn. You know, it all has to do with the economics of the area, what is gonna support those stores. So that's how you get a, you know, vibrant downtown. And that may not be what people want. They might
Right.
not want housing anymore in the downtown. So, you know, that comes out of the zoning, and that totally affects what kind of stores and businesses. That's where you see more, no, this is, you know, no offense, Michelle, but I mean, that's where you see like all real estate, you know, on the first floor, all lawyers on the first floor. You know, that doesn't generate traffic, so they don't need a vibrant downtown because it's not walked by business or people driving by going, oh, you know, I think I'm gonna buy a house today, I'm gonna drive in. That's not what happens, but they're gonna go, oh, I want a cup of coffee, that's a new place to try, you know?
So, I think also to look at is that to have someone invest in a parcel downtown is why a lot of developers are attracted to mixed use. Because when commercial goes quiet and it's not as, you don't have as much commercial, then to pay the bills, your residents on the second floor carry the cost of that building, right? So that's why it's very popular, you know, even investors that I work with, they love the mixed use, they don't necessarily like a standalone, like give me a CVS or something like that, because it offsets, it just helps balance that, like you said, the economic stuff.
And your building, I mean, where you're located, there's apartments there.
Yeah.
You know, there's apartments on the second
I
story.
guess I didn't understand, and maybe Rick, you can help me, maybe I just overlooked this when we were doing it, but I don't understand what it means when it says a sufficient number of residents that can supplement and support the area's economic viability. Is that, are you saying that because Kathy, you're saying, okay, we're in this like 1 mile area and we have, you know, these many parcels, and based on these many parcels, you should have this many housing units? Is that what that statement is? Or is it, I guess I didn't understand that statement, I thought that was pretty specific.
The statement is trying to just reinforce the point that the part that housing plays in the viability of downtown is there has to be enough of it to make sense to generate the traffic you need from residents. So this doesn't try to say how much housing there needs to be. It's trying to connect the fact that there needs to be, based on our zoning design standards, some housing created in the downtown, and enough of it has to be created that will affect the viability of the downtown area. So that's why the word sufficient was used. In the downtown plan, in the economic development section, when the work is done to actually start to analyze the downtown and what that's going to look like, a lot more specific data that Kathy's talking about will start to be unearthed, and that will start to drive the definition of what sufficient means. But in the housing section of the plan, this is just supposed to be a linkage into the downtown part of the development. It's just trying to make the point that there has to be there needs to be enough housing created to make the downtown viable. That's all I was trying to say.
I went to that economic development in downtown, and they said it doesn't even have to be like, I understand mixed use would definitely help, but they could even sometimes include a 1 mile radius, so like even Summer Street and School Street, and all those would be included as part of housing downtown for economic vitality when I went to the class.
So, Amy, what were you talking before about adding the wording of that committee?
Oh, no, what I
Yeah.
wanted to add was guided by zoning, design standards, and the downtown visualization study. Because I thought the downtown visualization study would help what housing is gonna look like downtown. Like, cause maybe like you said, people like mixed use, the look with the realtors underneath and the apartments above, but they don't like 4 townhouses that are 40 feet high stuck between 2 commercial buildings. So maybe I thought guided by zoning, design standards, and the downtown visualization study.
The other reason, Kathy, I like adding that is because of what you said in the beginning was, we do have zoning bylaws, right? So that we have to hold on to that. But we don't have a historic district where we can really say, well, you're not meeting our guidelines, our design guidelines.
Yeah, you would have standards in a historic district.
Yeah, but we don't have a historic district
Correct.
down there. But we do have this downtown visualization study that might be helpful just to add and say, well, it's not meeting, do you know what I'm saying? I just wanted to know, is there something else we can put in there that can help with that?
We could
Yeah, I
add
think
after
when-
design standards and downtown visualization.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way Amy wants to, insert that in after standards.
Okay,
Yeah, guided by zoning, design standards, and the downtown visualization study. Because the way we talked about it before, if it is gonna be a whole downtown, it's gonna have to study, and I would think that would happen before this would happen.
And I think like we said a long time ago when we talked about that study, when you hear certain words, it can scare you, like you hear density and it scares you. But if you could see what it
Right.
is and look at it and say, oh, that's what it is, that's not so
I'm
bad.
familiar with
I'm okay with
Yeah.
that, then it's easier.
I actually think the project that was originally, and Rick, you probably remember this, was supposed to go with the fire department, is scheduled to go now. I think that would have ended up to be a really good looking project, that would have been really nice and everybody would have liked it. But it never worked out for the person who was in there, and obviously, but that was something that I think for that parcel land would have really looked nice. Those were almost,
It's 20 single family, 20 apartments over
but they're all one
mixed use.
bedroom, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we're
one
adding,
bedroom,
yeah.
I just wanna wrap this up.
Yeah, start with that.
So we're adding that visualization as that third bullet, and I think it looked like the Master Plan Steering Committee thought was fine with adding while maintaining the existing character of downtown neighborhoods. So does that satisfy what you what you wanted to do, and Amy?
Yep.
And Millie or Anthony?
I'm good with it.
Okay, H2-6, I don't even know what my edit was, but I just put in whatever the Master Plan Steering Committee suggested. I think that was fine with me. Do you have the, it was update the town's existing, I think they put housing production plan to include present day information. And we had just added, including a robust impact analysis study.
Study, yep.
So whatever that, I don't know what my original edit was.
And you also added a specific senior housing plan, but we took that out because
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
not
whatever.
part of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I heard that, yeah.
So it would read, Carrie, this is including your edit and then the steering committee. Update the town's existing housing production plan to include present day information, comma, including a robust impact analysis study.
Yep, that's what I have.
I just have a quick question. I had talked about it at the very beginning. If we update the town's existing housing production plan, does that mean we're gonna have to add more 40B housing?
No, it's not necessarily 40B. We did that housing production plan because we knew that 40B was coming.
Yep.
So, I mean, your housing production plan, again, this is a really extreme example, but you could say, we want to add 5 units in 5 years.
I think there was a number, I read it,
And-
I tried to understand it in between meetings. I think you have to add like 5%, or not 5%, it was like 1%.
And you can, again, it's a goal to do it. We knew that we were going to meet our housing production plan. I mean, there's no, the state's not gonna come and take away, your school funding because we didn't meet the housing production plan.
Okay.
But I mean, the goal, if a community wants to do a housing production plan, it means you're serious. You want to produce X amount of units, and these are the ways that we're gonna try to do that.
Mhm.
I mean, if you don't, again, there's no penalty.
So alright, so if it came out like, oh, you have to do 1%, and that's 300 houses, but that's high density that the town isn't gonna like. Then you could
because
say,
you're,
oh, we don't
because
wanna
the
do that
community's
anymore.
going to decide what that number is in your housing production plan.
Mhm.
They decide to do this work and not file an updated plan with the state.
Right, so you can do it,
You know,
not
we
file
got to
it if it,
The main reason towns did this, and the reason we did it, was as soon as you get this plan approved by the state, even if you're not at 10%, you're not subject to 40Bs. As long as you demonstrate every year that you're making progress along the plan, even though you're not 10%. So it's sort of a protection thing. And we knew Avalon was coming in and we were gonna make it. But Avalon wasn't gonna come in for like another 2 years. So we filed this plan and we get 2 years of preliminary protection.
Right.
Until Avalon is done. And that's what a lot of towns do. They know they're gonna get there, but they can't get there in the next 12 to 24 months. And so they put a plan in place which is fairly easy to achieve, knowing that at some point, something is gonna happen in the town to get them there.
Okay, and then, what we touched, so that was just what came from Master Plan Steering Committee, exactly, so I have no additional changes to that. And then, like we talked about before, how does the board feel about just putting in something, whether it's a placeholder that we end up having to edit, but not hold up the plan for, something about creating a committee to research the unique housing needs of people with disabilities, so we can at least flag it, and if the language is wrong, we edit it down the line, but at least like we have something in there. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, or?
is it hard to add it, Kathy, and then email like the consultants and say, do you have language for that, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's what
That's what you said.
I mean, that's what I can do, is just, because just like every topic, there's buzzwords to use and not use,
Okay.
And,
I mean, would the board be okay if we approve the plan, because I don't want, where this is at, we're gonna.
Well, we're meeting next week
No.
for Steris.
you got 15 minutes next week.
Oh, yeah,
For
but I mean,
Steris.
so if we approve it all with that one line, and then
Let's
shake.
just, I don't wanna hold it up.
Okay,
Would it be okay if we just like put it in there, and if for some reason Kathy figured out the language was something different, then we say.
can you
let's
email
adapt.
us the language and we say?
Can we do that, Kathy?
Yeah, I'll check, I mean, tomorrow I'll check with the consultant, about what the,
So I don't wanna hold up the approval this evening, though.
and so you're,
It was just create a committee to research the unique housing needs of people with disabilities. think that was it. The only other thing, we just talked last time about implementation. So any edits would obviously be reflected in the implementation side of it. I don't know, we didn't have to discuss implementation. We had made some recommendations that we would just want. Do we have any recommendations for implementation? I realize the board of selectmen appoints that committee, but anything that we want to say or comment on, recommend?
I mean, it should be like someone from the planning board, right, someone from the board of selectmen.
Yeah. Well, one thing we talked about was we run in terms. So if there was, if there were two representatives from planning, then it would just be like a either an alternate or something that's staggered. So if someone doesn't come back, that there's that continuity, because this is gonna be 20 years going down. Any other thoughts?
I would definitely like an alternate, because I think it's important.
Or any, it doesn't have to be that, anything else on that implementation?
Yeah.
Okay, and then, so Kathy, just to make sure that I know, we went through a lot of different things. So before, like, we'll go through the approval process, but then before, like, it just goes to print, do you mind just sharing it back so we
Oh,
can-
yeah, I put together a list from your last meeting,
Okay,
and I'll do it for this meeting. This is what I told Donnie and Jeffrey, is that, I think, Melody captured it pretty succinctly in last week's minutes. But anyways, I've got a running sheet
Okay.
going to, and I can send that out to everybody too. But like the beginning of next week, if you want to see it, I'll send it to you and to the consultants, or send it to you first.
yeah, it doesn't matter, I just wanna make sure we had a lot of things going. Okay, any other last comments from here, any board members?
No.
Any last comments?
No.
Any last comments, staff? Fred's not here to comment, so we'll assume he has nothing to say. Okay, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the master plan as amended?
I'll make a motion to approve the master plan as amended.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for all your work. Yes, thank you for all your work. I realize it's a lot, thank you for sticking with us. It was a lot to talk through, but.
It'll be a good plan,
This is
make some
exciting.
headway with it.
It will be a good plan.
So I just have one A&R for you.
Oh, yeah, did you want to
Rest of your
do
plan is-
minutes or anything?
Have a
or-
vacation.
Oh, sure.
You going
I mean,
away?
I'm sorry, Gary.
Going away
Whatever you want
next
to
week.
do. But I'm just saying, outside
That's
of,
nice, so you
you
can
know,
enjoy it now.
I just have one A&R for you to sign.
Okay, great. So just really quickly, literally, if we can just do it in 5 minutes, if we can just get through a couple of the minutes, because one of them's from December, so I at least want to push that one along. Was it 12 minutes? Did anybody have any edits to those minutes?
I think I sent it to Kathy.
Mhm.
I think I had it on all, were there 3 of them?
Yeah, on the, I mean, if you just want me to,
Yeah, do you mind?
no, I'll give you Amy's, on page 5, I don't know if anyone has minutes or not, but Amy, just added a sentence about, this is on 5 Goddard Road. Wait, which one are we doing? December 12th.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So for, 5 Goddard Road, Amy added a sentence, it's in the middle paragraph, about, if recycled asphalt gets torn up by the tracked vehicles, the plastic could tear. And then, tracked vehicles. So that's one of, Amy's,
Because I think it's cracked.
and, it's a
Amy's
cracked.
chair.
Then on page 9, a sentence was attributed to Michelle, and Amy found out that it was her that said it.
I said something, said your name.
And
Probably don't
then,
want it.
and that was it. So that was it for Amy's edits, and then Carrie, your edits. Carrie just changed mention to explain, and this again is about 5 Goddard Road. Talked about, added a sentence about the board agreeing to hear the presentation this evening, but would not be making a decision until the application was complete and all information was submitted in a timely manner. A couple other edits about spelling out, actually, I can't remember if we spelled out the committee and then you added the initials, or we had the initials and you
You have
spelled
the
out
initials
committee.
and I,
Okay,
just for people reading.
yeah, no,
Mhm.
makes total sense. And then, on, the page, where, how we have it written up is that it was a motion to grant, and you're right, those were straw polls.
Okay.
Now that I remember that,
Mhm.
because that was just giving them the indication about those two waivers.
Mhm.
So I'll just change that to literally say that a straw poll was taken with the board, about, granting the waiver. But you didn't grant the waiver at that point. And I think that was it, Carrie, for your edits.
Okay, any other edits? Is there a motion to accept the minutes as amended?
I'll make the motion to accept the minutes as amended.
Second,
Second,
any further discussion? All in favor? Okay, minutes passed. Then we have the 21st, we don't have the 16th minutes, why don't we just knock out the 21st? Were there edits to the 21st minutes?
You skipped up with you?
Oh, sorry.
No, all right.
While you're looking, were there any other comments?
So on the, January 21st, Amy had a couple of edits. On the first page, there's a paragraph about solar energy. Amy added a couple, just expanded what was written about ground-mounted solar system. And then Ms. Pereski questioned if a larger setback from abutters would be needed, since small-scale ground-mounted solar will now be allowed. And so that was inserted, and then on page, I think it's 3 or 4, about home occupation, Amy added a couple sentences about carports. There was a discussion about the carport footnote 6, the amount of commercial vehicles allowed on a property. Mr. Federico stated only one commercial vehicle is allowed on the property today. Mr. Federico mentioned this footnote should be deleted and the bylaw should be updated to include this information. Ms. Jewett stated she would look into writing a bylaw to update this. And then there was about the master plan. The example was given such, it didn't make sense, now that we're reading it. So there's a couple of words missing, so Amy reworded it and said baseline data is land coverage and the current data is land use, and the two are not meant to be compared. And then there's another sentence Amy added about table 2.2, about the 480 acres of industrial land. And then just clarified about H26, about the housing production plan, see what we're missing as far as housing. Know we can support more specific studies such as the price point study. And I think that was it.
No, and I didn't have anything.
Yeah, and you didn't have any, Karen.
Okay, anything else for those minutes?
No.
Okay, motion to accept those minutes as amended?
I make a motion to accept the January 21st minutes as amended.
Second. Further discussion? All in favor? Okay, those minutes are set. I actually did not have time to go through the February 18th minutes. I don't know if anybody else.
No.
If we can continue.
Amy
those
did,
next time.
and I think I sent out Amy's edits. I mean, again, there was, oh no, you did, Carrie. You did the 18th.
February 18th?
Mm-hmm. I had 2 edits from you. Well, at least actually you responded to the question I put about who
Oh,
made the
that was
motions.
just responding to about the motion.
Okay, so you didn't look at the minutes.
No.
Okay.
Okay, so that's it then, unless, and you said that we just have A&Rs. And
Yep.
why don't we wrap? So we can really. Is there a motion to? Good night, Henry. Is there a motion to close?
I'll make a motion
Motion
to
to adjourn.
adjourn the meeting.
Second. Second. All in favor?